The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. Today on the Thom Hartmann Book Club with Thom Hartmann University, we're reading from what is apparently Donald Trump's second favorite book. His number one, according to his first wife, as I recall, was the collected speeches of Adolf Hitler, which was on his bed next to his, or on his bedstand next to his bed for years. But when he was asked by reporters his favorite book, he said P.T. Barnum's The Art of Money Getting, or Golden Rules for Making Money. So I thought, hey, let's check this out. This is from the introduction. Those who really desire to attain an independence, but have only to set their minds upon it and adopt the proper means, as they do in regard to any other object which they wish to accomplish, and the thing is easily done. But however easy it may be found to make money, I have no doubt many of my hearers will agree it is the most difficult thing in the world to keep it. The road to wealth is, as Dr. Ben Franklin truly says, as plain as the road to the mill. It consists simply in expending less than we earn. That seems to be a very simple problem. Mr. Micawber, one of those happy creations of the genial Dickens, puts the case in a strong light when he says that to have an income of £20 per annum and spend £20 and 6 pence is to be the most miserable of men, whereas to have an income of only £20 and spend but £19 and 6 pence is to be the happiest of mortals. Many of my readers may say, we understand this. This is economy, and we know economy is wealth. We know we can't eat our cake and keep it also. Yet I beg to say that perhaps more cases of failure arise from mistakes on this point than almost any other. The fact is, many people think they understand economy when they really do not. True economy is misapprehended, and people go through life without properly comprehending what that principle is. One person says, I have an income of so much, and here's my neighbor who has the same, yet every year he gets something ahead and I fall short. Why is it? I know all about economy. Well, he thinks he does, but he does not. There are many who think that economy consists in saving cheese parings and candle ends. Keep in mind, this was written in the late 1900s. In cutting off 2 pence from the laundress's bill and doing all sorts of little mean, dirty things. Economy is not meanness. The misfortune is also that this class of persons let their economy apply in only one direction. They fancy that they are so wonderfully economical in saving a half penny where they ought to spend 2 pence that they think they can afford to squander in other directions. A few years ago, before kerosene oil was discovered or thought of, one might stop overnight at almost any farmer's house in the agricultural districts to get a very good supper. But after supper, he might attempt to read in the sitting room and would find it impossible with insufficient light from just one candle. The hostess, seeing his dilemma, would say, it is rather difficult to read here in the evenings. The proverb said, you must have a ship at sea in order to be able to burn 2 candles at once. We never have an extra candle except on extra occasions. Those extra occasions occur perhaps twice a year. In this way, the good woman saves $5, $6, or $10 in that time, but the information which might be derived from having an extra candle would, of course, far outweigh a ton of candles. But the trouble does not end there. Feeling that she is so economical in tallow candles, she thinks she can afford to go frequently to the village and spend $20 or $30 for ribbons and furloughs, many of which are not necessary. This false economy may frequently be seen in men of business, and in those instances, it often runs to paper writing. You find good businessmen who save all the old envelopes and scraps and would not tear a new sheet of paper if they could avoid it for the world. This is all very well. They may in this way save $5 or $10 a year, but being so economical only in note paper, they think they can afford to waste time, to have expensive parties, and to drive their own carriages. This is an illustration of Dr. Franklin's, quote, saving at the spigot and wasting at the bunghole, or penny wise and pound foolish. Punch, in speaking of this one idea class of people, says They are like the man who bought a penny herring for his family's dinner and then hired a coach and four to take it home. I never knew a man who succeeded by practicing this kind of economy. True economy consists in always making the income exceed the outgo. Wear the old clothes a little longer if necessary. Dispense with the new pair of gloves. Mend the old dress. Live on plainer food if need be. So that under all circumstances, unless some unforeseen accident occurs, there will be a margin in favor of the income. Penny here, a dollar there, placed at interest, goes on accumulating, and in this way, the real desire is attained. It requires some training, perhaps, to accomplish this economy, but once used to it, you will find there is more satisfaction in rational saving than in irrational spending. Here's a recipe which I recommend. I have found it to work an excellent cure for extravagance and especially for mistaken economy. When you find that you have no surplus at the end of the year and yet have a good income, I advise you to take a few sheets of paper and form them into a book and mark down every item of expenditure. Posted every day or week in two columns, one headed necessities, the other comforts, and the other headed luxuries. And you will find that the latter column will be double, triple, and frequently 10 times greater than the former. The real comfort of life costs but a small portion of what most of us can earn. Dr. Franklin said, "It is the eyes of others and not our own eyes which ruin us. If all the world were blind except myself, I should not care for fine clothes and furniture." It is the fear of what Mrs. Grundy may say that keeps the noses of most worthy families to the grindstone. In America, many persons like to repeat, "We are all free and equal," but it is a great mistake in more senses than one. That we are born free and equal is a glorious truth in one sense, yet we are not all born equally rich, and we never shall be. So anyhow, the book is The Art of Money Getting, or Golden Rules for Making Money by P.T. Barnum. It's actually a pretty good book. We'll be And greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. Oh, there you are. And it is it's the middle of the day. We've been doing these more often on Wednesdays, but Friday is absolutely spectacular because we replay Friday's show over the weekend. So Congressman Mark Pocan is with us. Middays with Mark. He's the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus and ably represents the state of Wisconsin. Congressman, welcome back.
Hey, thanks, Tom. Glad to be here.
So there's a few things on my mind and on our on our listeners' minds, and that I wanted to ask you about. First of all, your thoughts on this tax proposal that the Republicans have put out.
You know, this is going to be, I think, the big issue for all of us over the next probably 2 months, Tom. You know, this is a tax plan that's perfect for the Trump family, for the president's cabinet, for members of Mar-a-Lago. Their extra $100,000 entry fee is going to be a good investment for them, and for many of the folks who are the most wealthy in this country. And the problem is, at the end of the day, it's going to leave us with a big deficit where they're going to wind up coming back and cutting programs that affect the middle class. Some people in the middle class will see a small tax cut. Many will not and see tax increases. But there's a whole lot of problems. This is a redistribution of income from really the grassroots to the very top. And we've got to be out there doing everything we can to make sure this doesn't happen. If this does, you're going to see a lot of negative ramifications to a lot of people for a very long time.
Yeah. I'm curious your take on Donna Brazil's new book, the excerpt that was published yesterday at whichever website it was. Politico, that's right. It was on Politico.com.
Yeah, you know, I'll tell you, for many of us, you know, the DNC is kind of a separate operation, right? I probably know the DCCC a little closer, the Congressional Campaign Committee. But to see what they're saying and to hear that there was, you know, some financial connections because of instability at the DNC, I mean, you know, none of that is an excuse to be tilting towards one person or another. And, you know, I think naturally, you know, we all knew that there was probably a little bit of a bias in the sense that, you know, Hillary Clinton had run before. Bill Clinton was the president. Clearly they knew a lot of people in the, let's say, the upper echelon, so to speak, of the Democratic Party. And Bernie himself was an independent for many years. So naturally you knew that there probably were some natural inclinations towards Hillary. But then to hear maybe the depth of what it was going much deeper and much farther certainly is troublesome, and I think it's a real wake-up call for the current DNC under Tom Perez and Keith Ellison to make sure that that never happens. We can never have a primary where someone is getting preferential treatment against anyone else, because that's the whole idea of having a primary. Let the people decide. Don't let the insiders decide.
Yeah, well said. Thoughts on what else is going on in Congress right now that you think that is consequential?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's interesting right now with what happened with the Mueller investigation, and particularly in some statements by Attorney General Jeff Sessions. The fact that, once again, it looks like he may not be completely providing the truth to Congress, including up to maybe even 2 weeks ago when he testified before the Senate. So I think, while we're waiting for the Mueller investigation to continue, this is just, I think, the opening salvo of what they're doing. We got to make sure that at the same time we don't have things like this. If Jeff Sessions did indeed lie to Congress, then that's going to be further complicating the investigation. So I think that's something of note. They had the chip bill, or the chip bill passed today in the House, just passed. About 15 Democrats voted with Republicans, but largely on partisan lines for an imperfect bill. I just think most of our attention is going to be around potentially the continuing resolution going into February is what we're hearing could happen right now. But this tax bill is going to be, I think, taking all of the oxygen out of Washington for the next 4, 6, 8, and maybe even more weeks.
Yeah, it's truly extraordinary. Anything else that you wanted to just riff on, or shall we start picking up phone calls?
I'm glad to take on calls. I'm guessing the tax plan will come up quite a bit, and there are so many bad things about it. I think as people learn more and more and more about it, we knew that they were going to get rid of a bunch of things that affect only the wealthy in this country. That's already been out there. But now things they took away, some of the tax preferences for student loan interest and for student tuition, for things like medical expenses, alimony payments, tax preparation costs. Some of these things they keep saying they're doing for small businesses are some of the deductions that actually small business perhaps uses, and now we're looking at everything they've offered may not be exactly as they're saying. So whenever they call this a middle class tax cut, we already know that's a lie, but we got to make sure that everyone knows it's a lie, and that when you've got groups like the Realtors Association and the home builders all opposing this, and other groups, I think you're going to realize that what they put together is a plan that's really for the super wealthy. It's a billionaire tax cut. It's the Trump family tax cut plan, and it really is not. We're getting a couple crumbs so that maybe we don't notice all that they've taken out of this plan. Yeah,
we should start calling it that, the Trump family tax cut plan.
It is. It's, if you think about it, the people who are going to benefit, Tom, it's the Trump family. It's the cabinet that Trump's appointed. It's members of Mar-a-Lago. I mean, it's pretty perverse, and we need to get that message out.
Yeah, and now he's appointing members of Mar-a-Lago to ambassadorships and things. So
it's a good investment, I suppose, these days.
Excuse me, I'm sneezing here. Eric in New York City, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan. Eric? Okay, let's try Joe in Cupertino, California. Joe, you're on the air with Congressman
Congressman Pocan, it's such a pleasure to speak with you. I had called, and I didn't know I was going to get to speak to someone as yourself. I'm represented by Ro Kahana, a really good congressman. I know you know who he is. You're on the Progressive Caucus, and he was under you. Recently went to a town hall meeting where he spoke adamantly about the war that's going on in Yemen, and I think it's really great to have such progressive thoughts in our Congress. My question, or wasn't going to be a question, but I do get to speak with you, this tax plan. How can we even look at the tax law when we haven't seen his taxes? I don't think that this is a non-starter. It's a non-starter because this is all just about giving big business and big money a tax break under what appears to be the clouds of impeachment, if I'm not over-speaking my point. And I think here in California, I don't know if you guys are seeing it out there, but there's this commercial, an infomercial about the need to impeach the president. I don't know. It's not an unreasonable.
Yeah, it's time, Stiers. Joe, we're starting to wander into 2 and 3 levels of of question here. Congressman, we just have a minute to the break here. Your thoughts?
Sure. Joe, first of all, Ro Khanna is a strong member of our Progressive Caucus, working with him on the Yemen issue right now, and he's doing a great job, especially for his first year. This has been amazing. I wouldn't call the tax plan a non-starter, because I think this is what Paul Ryan has wanted. If he wanted to affect Medicaid since his keggers in college, this has been since Play-Doh for him. I mean, this has been his main focus, and this is what their donors want, and they're getting nothing else so far this year. So I would watch this very closely. This is probably the biggest threat we have seen yet to public policy under this administration and this Congress. And I think we all be making sure that everyone understands this is just a redistribution of wealth upward, but we've got to make sure that everyone actually gets that and doesn't think they're going to sell for a couple crumbs instead.
Yeah. It seems like that's what it's going to be. Well, we'll see how well they sell this thing. The latest poll I saw showed that only 15% of Americans didn't think that this was a bailout for the rich, but we'll see where this all goes. Congressman Mark Pocan is our guest. It's Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman Mark Pocan, co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, taking your calls. And welcome back. Mark Taylor Canfield, a reporter from Seattle. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan, Mark. No? Okay, let's see here. Let's try Sybil in Greer, South Carolina. Sybil, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, gentlemen. I was calling about the taxes. Of course, it's for the rich, but what people don't realize, last year when I paid my taxes, and I'm on Social Security disability, and I was in a car accident when I was 49, so now I'm 64. My taxes last year with the $6,000 deduction and only 80% of your medical, I paid about $125, $135 more in taxes just from last year. I can only imagine what's going to happen now.
Yeah, Sybil, I'll tell you, a lot of people are going to be very surprised if this passes, because while they're being told that on one case the standard deduction is doubling, and that sounds good, I mean, just immediately, if you go from $6,350 to $12,000, so that's almost doubling, immediately you lose the personal exemption for $4,000. There's barely even a bump. And then you look at all the other things you're going to lose, and the fact that there's $1.5 trillion essentially added to the deficit, which they're going to come back and use as excuse to go after Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, and other programs that we care about. This is going to be, and ultimately, even those who get a tax break are going to pay more for other things down the road, and this is all so that people like the Trump family and people at Mar-a-Lago can benefit. So we've got to be very vigilant in getting out all the details to people, especially if someone thinks there's anything for them. I guarantee, unless they're a super wealthy person, at the end of the day, they're going to pay more because this is not a plan for them.
One of my kids just got married and is adopting, and the adoption deductibility is vanishing from this.
Yeah.
Medical bills, the leading cause of bankruptcy in the United States, the medical bill exemption is radically being scaled back. I mean, seriously, this is what these guys think they're going to sell?
Well, and this is all
the student loan deduction is going away?
They have to come up with the money to pay for the tax breaks for the wealthy. So the only way they can kind of give you some kind of artificial tax cut in the doubling of the standard deduction, and then all this other stuff is going to have to be used to pay for, the estate tax, the top rate, the fact that fewer people will be paying the top rate, getting the corporate rate down to 20%, and all the other provisions, the pass-through income provisions, which, by the way, I read the Trump Trump Corporation has over 500 pass-through entities.
Well, hey, but Mark, isn't your printing shop set up as a sub-S?
Exactly, yeah.
So you and I might be big winners here,
Yeah, and we're not asking for it. That's
right.
The line, right? But the Trump family, when Donald Trump did that huge, one of many lies on this issue, when he said that he wouldn't benefit, I mean, he has 500 pass-through entities. alone that'll probably see something.
I think that's just crazy.
If I can, Tom, he's been saying that their average middle-class family will get an average of a $4,000 tax cut. I just want to make sure people understand what average is. If you put a billionaire in a room with 100,000 union workers, you're going to have a room full of millionaires, because on average, everyone is then a millionaire. Right. But it's not how it works. So that tax cut, again, is a lie the way he's putting it out there, and we just need to keep getting that word out.
Yeah, it's pretty astonishing. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan right after this. Hey, what if...
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
Hi, I'm Heather with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving of donations, volunteering, or even spreading the word, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to sustain for more than 20 years. Now, you can give to Free Speech TV through the Branch of Gratitude. This program is a sustainable way to give that reduces waste through paper mailing, postage, and staff hours. By choosing to participate in the Branch of Gratitude, you are joining hands with the socially conscious community and sending a message to the world that Free Speech TV is not only here to stay, it is here to thrive. Please call 877-378-8669 or go online to freespeech.org. Make a difference and join the Branch of Gratitude today.
With Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program, taking your calls. And Laura in Chicago, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi everyone. Hi, Representative and Tom. Money is important, but peace is priceless, Representative Pocan. And I wanted to know if you had heard, and if the Progressive Caucus has been talking about, apparently there was a collapse in North Korea of their main nuclear missile testing site. And apparently like 200 nuclear workers have died in this collapse. This has occurred perhaps maybe 3 days ago. It's kind of hard to get news about this. I've been really searching like the international news about this. But it may have destroyed the nuclear capabilities of North Korea. And I'm wondering if you know anything about it. And if so, are you going to use this to prevent provocation against North Korea so we don't end up in a nuclear war with these, or any kind of war with that country or on that peninsula?
Yeah, Laura, a great question. And, I'll tell you, the thing I hear the most when I go around my district where people are worried, and I unfortunately share the worry, is, and what could happen in a situation like North Korea, right, where you've got someone who has the nuclear ability to potentially put a missile into the air. We've been fighting with them, and I think in a very unproductive way, and it's a real concern. And I think the information I have is about what you've seen. It's really hard to get much out of North Korea when it comes to news and information. So I don't have anything extra or above on that. So I couldn't tell you if it has put an end to their program. But, clearly we as a Progressive Caucus are very concerned when it comes to peace and justice issues. Our budget we put out purposely, tries to put less money into defense spending and more money into actually doing, building in countries around the world to improve our image. And also, we've been promoting a lot of other peace issues like the issue in Yemen and other things. So I don't have more information for you, Laura, but I agree. As much as taxes are the issue right now du jour, although it's a very big issue du jour, that's very significant what happened, and hopefully we'll all find out more soon.
Yeah. Russell in Hickory Hills, Illinois. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, yeah, Mr. Pocan, before I get to it, the $4,000, today there's a commercial saying it's only $1,223 you're going to get in taxes, but this guy from Texas, he's in your House of Representatives, been on MSNBC. trying to push that doing away with the death tax is going to make the rich and the middle class come closer in their disparity of pay. I don't see how that happens if you're giving the rich all the money. And how is it playing with Paul Ryan's district?
Yeah, so first of all, I mean, it's a completely idiotic statement, but there are a number of idiotic statements that come out of members of Congress from Texas, so I'm not entirely surprised. But, you know, I mean, let's face it, this is a tax, and I got PolitiFacted on it. Usually politicians aren't bragging about PolitiFacts, but I got one of the rare truths when I said it only affects about 2 out of every 1,000 people. And, in fact, when Donald Trump got tested on the estate tax, he said that it would help millions of small businesses and farms, and in the year that they did the Pinocchio rating on him, he got 4 Pinocchios. Only 80 of the people that had to pay the estate tax were small businesses or farms in the entire country. So, you know, they're full of a whole lot of lies when it comes to this. I can tell you, in Paul Ryan's district, this is not an issue people are asking for. In fact, just the opposite. I grew up in that district. It's my neighboring district. It's a largely deindustrialized district. A lot of industry has left, and this is not something that's going to benefit the people of the first district. So once again, Paul Ryan cares about the donor class and the folks that, you know, he hangs out in that neocon world that really care about these big tax cuts. And I think this will not play well in his district, and he's going to have to really explain this in a very tough way next year.
We have just 20 seconds to a hard break here, Congressman. Have you gotten any indications that people in Paul Ryan's district are up to the game he's playing? Because he seems to win there fairly handily every year.
You know, to be real honest, Tom, he's never had a serious challenge until this year. He's had a couple people that ran, you know, decent races, but, you know,
right,
vastly outspent. And, you know, for the first 10 years, no one knew where Paul stood on any issue. He was a nice guy. He is a nice guy, and he came across that way. But now he's the guy who wrote a health insurance bill to kick 20 million people off of their health insurance, and now he's going to provide $5.5 trillion in tax cuts to the wealthiest in the country. I think there's a price to be paid. We just have to make sure that those in the district are getting that word out.
Yeah. He's a nice guy, but...
He's a nice guy one-on-one, but it's not nice to kick 20 million people off of their health insurance, which is why I and Gwen Moore recently also endorsed him from Wisconsin. It's something we haven't done over 20 years. We had a informal rule. We stayed out of each other's districts. We decided he's enough of a hazard to the people of the first district that we had to get involved and support Randy Bryce.
Yeah. And so you're supporting Iron Stash, Randy Bryce?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's going to be a real interesting case. It's going to be a real interesting case.
Well, I'll tell you, when there's 14,000 people that used to make cars out of 70,000 in Kenosha and 10,000 in Janesville, I think they're going to relate a lot better to someone who's an iron worker than a guy who drinks $350 bottles of wine with a bunch of hedge fund managers.
Yeah.
I think it's going to really, ultimately, people will understand who's on their side.
It's going to be a real interesting race. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls. Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back with more in just a moment.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan right after this.
Hey, it's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Cracking the Code, How to Win Hearts, Change Minds, and Restore America's Original Vision. This is from the introduction, page 1. My wife Louise and I live atop 30 feet of water, 100 feet from shore, in a houseboat on a river in Portland, Oregon. Or at least we did when I wrote this book. One day, I stepped out our back door onto the floating deck that serves as our backyard and found myself confronting a very upset Canada goose. He bobbed his head up and down, lifted his wings to make his body look larger and more intimidating, and ran straight at me, hissing and trying to nip at me. Obviously, observing this behavior, my comedian friend Swami Beyondananda, Steve Behrman, who was visiting us that week, named the bird Gooselini. I had no idea why this psycho goose was attacking me, but there was no mistake that Gooselini was trying to communicate. Stay inside that house and don't come out. I got the message, but I didn't stay inside. Instead, every time I went out to water the plants on my deck, I brought a broom with me to fight off Gooselini. I found out what was going on a week later when I learned from my neighbor the female goose had settled on her back deck just a few feet from our own and was sitting on a nest. I realized that Gooselini must have been the proud papa protecting his territory, and I stopped swatting at him with my broom. Gooselini has a lot to tell us about communication strategies. Even though he was just doing what a gander does when he wants a predator to leave, draw attention to himself and away from his mate, attack first and ask questions later, he was able to communicate the go-away part of his message to me pretty well. We all communicate all the time, even when we don't give much thought to what we are saying or how we're saying it. Because Gooselini was unable to use what we would call rational powers of persuasion, he communicated by going straight for the more primitive parts of my brain, the parts we shared as human and goose, the center of our gut feelings. First time Gooselini attacked, I backed off because he was successful in communicating an intent to harm me, which caused me to feel fear, the most primal and visceral of human emotions. The first key to unlocking the communication code is to understand that when we communicate, feeling comes first. Emotions will always trump intellect, at least in the short term. This emotive form of communication, however, ultimately didn't get Gooselini the response he wanted. On its own, the attack wasn't very persuasive. Instead of shooing me away, Gooselini made me angry. Effective communicators know how to get the response they want because they understand how to tailor a message to the person who's listening. They know the second key to unlocking the communication code is that the meaning of a communication is the response you get. Because Gooselini couldn't tell me his story, I had to imagine his story for myself. The first story I came up with was that he was simply a psycho goose trying to harm me for no reason I could understand. Second story I came up with after talking to my neighbor was the story of a dad protecting his soon-to-be hatched goslings. Both stories accurately described what was happening, but the stories led to very different endings. The psycho goose made me angry. The dad goose made me feel protective of Gooselini himself. In this book, I call such stories maps, and the world the stories describe as the territory. The third key to unlocking the communication code is, therefore, the map is not the territory. Each story captures a different piece of reality. No one story captures it all. The key to effective communication is to find the best story to use to convey your understanding of the world to the greatest number of people. In politics, we tell each other stories all the time. Think about it, politics is really nothing more than a large set of stories. The United States of America began as a story that the founders and framers told about a society that could live in harmony around the principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The country was held together after the Great Depression and through a war by a story told by Franklin Roosevelt, which he called the New Deal. Ronald Reagan told a very different story, one we're still in, that he called the free market story. In Reagan's story, our corporate CEOs should run our society instead of our elected representatives because, as Reagan pointed out and probably believed, quote, the best minds are not in government. If they were, business would hire them away, end of quote from Reagan. Most of the stories we hear in the media today are scary. We're told to be afraid because the world is a bad place and people are untrustworthy. Every goose is a Gooselini without understanding why. These scary stories are profitable to our infotainment industry and to the politicians who are typically allied with the barons of the infotainment industry. There is a different story, however, in which every Gooselini is a proud papa. It is a story of a world that is interconnected and of people who are fundamentally good. This is actually the traditional American liberal story, which has been told and understood since the first telling of it during the Enlightenment by thinkers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, John Locke, and Thomas Jefferson. It's the story that reaches directly back to the founding of this country. My aim with this book is to give you the tools to tell the liberal story and to tell it well. I'll show you how the process of communication is coded, actually hardwired into our brains, and help you crack that code to become a brilliant communicator. First, though, a few concepts it's important to master. Everybody wants the best outcomes, and their behavior reflects the best tools they have to achieve those outcomes. Another way of saying this is that people always make what they think are the best choices given the circumstances and the tools they have. All behavior has at its roots, the goal of a positive outcome. As a practical statement, this means that conservatives and liberals are both working toward the best world possible. And then it goes on from there. How do we differentiate this? How do we communicate this? The book is Cracking the Code. It's about the communication code.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and it's our Middays with Mark program. Congressman Mark Pocan, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. His website, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan, taking your calls for the hour. And Congressman, you're still with us?
I am.
Okay, great. Here's Norma from Montgomery, Alabama. Norma, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Dr. Tom. Hi, Dr. Mr. Pocan. First, you might be interested to know that there's a group here that printed up Save Healthcare, Vote for Randy Bryce down here in Alabama.
Wow.
Nice.
Yeah. But what I wanted to know was that yesterday, the Secretary of Agriculture, Perdue, had this meeting out at Great Falls, and they're talking about harvesting the national forest. Here in Alabama, Georgia Pacific, which is owned by the Koch brothers, is building a new lumber facility right in a town called Talladega, which is outside the Talladega National Forest. Do you know anything about their plans for cutting or even clear-cutting these national forests of ours?
Norma, I cannot tell you on this specific incident. I am just hearing this. I don't know what to say other than, part of our concern with this administration, period, is that they're going to be far more open to taking parts of our public lands and selling it off to various interests, from timber to oil to gas and others. So we have to be vigilant, but I don't know enough information about your particular situation.
Debbie in Sumter, South Carolina. You are on the air with Congressman Pocan. Debbie, listed on Sirius XM? 1, 2, 3. Okay. Got to listen to your phone, not your radio. Dan in Marion, Wisconsin. Hey, Dan, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, gentlemen. Allow me to vent for a moment. It seems that we find ourselves in the position of reacting to the tax plan. Again, we react to the health care plan. My point is, I would love to see an alternative tax plan from the Democrats, to be proactive, to come out with something, rather than trying to battle the talking points once again from the other side. I mean, I don't think we can win the battle of the media. We just can't do it. Here in Wisconsin, as Mark would probably tell you and be aware, we're being inundated with ads against Tammy Baldwin right now. She's proposed increasing taxes by $5 trillion, something ridiculous. So I think we need to be proactive with a tax plan that people can judge for themselves, rather than, again, being in the position of just trying to react to their plan. So
Let's
just
get
a thought. I will take my comments off air. Thanks, guys. Mark, thanks for the work you do. Tom, as well, thanks for the work you do. Greatly appreciated. Here in Wisconsin.
Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. I really appreciate that. So let me say a couple of things. One, I think what you're seeing coming together out of some of the conversations between the Democrats in the House and the Senate around needing a stronger economic message will put more of the meat on the bones, especially as we move forward. Already we're talking about some pretty substantive issues that I think will connect with folks. I think the risk you do is when you try to put your own plan out, then you confuse the issue. They're going to find one thing that people may not like about your plan, since we can't ever pass a plan right now anyway, because we don't have the House, the Senate, or the White House. Instead, there are so many terrible provisions of their plan. We need to make sure people fully understand what they're trying to do, which is lie to them, a giant lie about this being a tax cut for the middle class, and instead this is a giant redistribution of money to the very top, to very few in this country. And because it's such a unique, such a terrible plan they put out there, I think we have to take advantage of this unique opportunity to do just that. So while, Dan, I completely agree. I think in 2016 we lacked a coherent economic message to make voters get out. And Dan knows we had a 200,000 Democratic voter drop-off in Wisconsin alone in 2016, I think in large part because we didn't talk to those middle-class families about, that we really are the ones who watch out for them. This is the exact opposite of that. This is a tax plan just for the wealthiest on the backs of those middle-class folks, and I think we need to get that message out crystal clear.
Margot in Eastman, Wisconsin. We had a lot of Wisconsin callers today. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Well, I want to say first place, Wisconsin, with the gerrymandering and the voter suppression, really threw us in the back. But what I wanted to call about is Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. They're citizens of the United States, and what have we done? Look at Houston. Look at Florida. I think Puerto Rico could be like a primo example for people that believe in climate change, to put in solar, wind, water, and make it an example. And I have called the representatives from those two countries, the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. But what they're going through is unconscionable. I can't say it's because of racism, but I know this present regime, I call it, is disgusting. Those people need power. They could make their country great. And then you have, not to quote the creep, but excuse me, I am so angry over this.
Margot, let's listen to what
they are American citizens.
Right, Margot.
We haven't had that in
Margot,
Florida,
let's let Congressman Pocan respond to what you have to say. Margot, thank you for the call.
You know, I understand her frustration, Tom. I mean, in Wisconsin, she's right. We're one of those states, while not gerrymandered as bad as Ohio or Michigan or Pennsylvania. Just to give you an idea, Tom. Our legislative races are completely gerrymandered. Even our congressional races, we had 100,000 more people vote for Democrats in 2016 than Republicans, but they have 5 of the 8 seats. So, I understand Margot's frustration. I'm frustrated with Scott Walker. And I think her point about Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands is something that we've been trying to, as Democrats and especially as progressives, get the point across. I mean, these are American citizens. I still think that stunning press conference when President Trump finally went down to Puerto Rico, and first thing out of his mouth was how they have great weather as he's talking about a hurricane, and then secondly when he was throwing out paper towel rolls at them, really personified how little grasp of understanding this president has when it comes to the issues that face this country, especially Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. So, Margot, I'm with you. We're going to do everything we can to make sure, and in fact, in the children's health bill that passed today by almost all Republican votes, they woefully inadequately have Medicaid funding for Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands in that bill. So it continues. It's not just in the hurricane relief. It's in every other way, and we need to stop that.
Amazing. Angelo in Chicago, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Gentlemen, good morning. One thing I can say in my years of observing is that Democrats have always been good on policy, but Republicans have been good on politics. And one of the primary motivators that they use is fear. And I'm here to present you something that we can show to the American people that Americans should be afraid of. I see the Republican Party or the conservative movement as a mythological beast, Cerberus, with 2 heads. One would be the neo-Confederate Dixiecrat type of movement, and the other one would be the John Birch Society. The first, its goal is to eliminate all gains that were made during the Civil Rights era. The second one is to eliminate all gains that were made during the New Deal. So how do we show that beast to the populace, and what can we do about this, making Americans realize really what they're up against? Gentlemen, I'm looking forward to your ideas.
Yeah, Angela, I think actually you make a very perceptive analysis when you say, the Dems are very good on policy and Republicans are very good when it comes to politics, especially the politics of fear. They've been extremely good at that. And I like your analogy. The only thing I would say, Angelo, is while I completely agree, I mean, there is a large part of what's left in Donald Trump's base that is, clearly founded on racism, and that's where we see now people coming out from, wearing sheets to going on the streets of Charlottesville, and why that's so frustrating to all the rest of us. But I think many good people see that. I don't want to forget maybe the third head to this beast, which is the ultra wealthy in the corporate America head, because that's the beast we're seeing right now. They may be doing all this other stuff to keep a certain amount of their base with them no matter what, because what they're about to do is a tax plan that will hurt most of their base, but they'll still accept it for the racism. But we got to keep an eye on that corporate wing, because that's the wing that Paul Ryan comes from. That's the wing where I think you see Mitch McConnell coming from. And that's the wing that I think ultimately still for the party, maybe not for Donald Trump, because I do think there's a large bigoted faction that still runs how he operates. But for the Republican Party, I think their main driver is still that corporate wealthy wing. And this tax plan is Christmas, Hanukkah, Easter, Kwanzaa, you name it, all put together into one giant gift for them. And I think we've got to keep our eye on that right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls. It's Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. It's coming up on 45 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. You can contact Congressman Pocan at pocan.house.gov.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And you can tweet him at Rep, as in Representative, R-E-P, Mark, M-A-R-K, Pocan, P-O-C-A-N, Rep Mark Pocan. And welcome back. Patrick in Germantown, Maryland, watching us on Free Speech TV. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. I wondered if we could talk a little bit about the dollar as the global reserve currency and some forces that are coming to it really inexorably dethrone us. So for people who don't know, in 1971, Richard Nixon closed the gold window. And simultaneously, Henry Kissinger orchestrated a deal with Saudi Arabia so that the oil-producing and exporting countries, OPEC, would price all their oil in dollars. So even though the dollar wasn't good as gold, as they used to say, there was a demand for dollars because all global economies needed oil to thrive. Fast forward to today, and we're seeing headlines out of China, Russia, where they're planning to price oil in yuan, and Russia's already doing this. They're in their own currencies to avoid sanctions that we're probably unwisely continuing to layer on them, because it's only accelerating our own demise, because America's strength is essentially built on us being the global reserve currency. We're running massive deficits, and we have greater than $20 trillion national debt. But these deficits haven't mattered because of that need for people to have dollars to buy oil. Are people paying attention to this? Is this anything on the radar? And I think everyone who's listening should probably look at their savings, and if they're all in dollars, you need to really think about where America's going to be in 10 years.
Patrick, I think the part that definitely has policymakers, and I would argue in both parties, aware is that as we're moving forward, especially when it comes to, trade and everything else out there, where we are with our essentially our debts to China and other countries, that is something that is still very significant. And right now, what they're about to do is, as much as they talk about debt, the Republicans, it seemed to be a mantra for so long for them, they're adding $1.5 trillion to the debt in order to give tax cuts to the wealthiest. So it's very short-term thinking for their benefactors, their donors, rather than for the American people. So, I think we should continue to be concerned just based on that one fact alone in their tax plan. And interestingly, Tom, one other thing that I don't think a lot of people have seen, maybe a detail in the tax plan, but there's a provision that will cost about $70 billion a year, or about 35% of the benefits that are coming on the corporate tax and how they're structuring it will flow to foreign investors who own shares in American companies. So we're actually going to be incentivizing to the tune of $70 billion, a huge chunk to people who are non-American citizens who are going to be benefiting because all they, again, care about is moving money to the wealthiest. And I think that's just one of those little gems that as people look at this plan, they're going to keep finding out.
That's pretty amazing. That is extraordinary. What can people, we had just 30 seconds to the break here, Congressman. What can people do about this?
You know, I'll tell you, it's calling your member of Congress, your senators, working with groups like Indivisible so that you can call into other people's districts, into Republican districts, to talk to individuals, to make them connect to their congresspeople and senators. But this is a big fight, and healthcare was vitally important to 20 million people and to all of us, obviously. But this is also because eventually these cuts are going to come back on that $1.5 trillion, and we're going to see it in Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, and infrastructure and other things that are important. So this is an important fight, the biggest fight, I would argue, we've seen this year.
Yeah, amen. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls. More right after this. Welcome back. It's Middays with Mark. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls. Lillian in Chicago, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, good morning or good afternoon, depending where you are. I have actually a question and a comment. I know an earlier caller said that she was on Social Security disability and was talking about her taxes and how they were going to go up. I'm on Social Security disability and I don't pay taxes, but so they kind of confused me. I hope I'm not getting into trouble. But my accountant said I don't know. I wonder if it's because I have interest on mortgage and real estate taxes that would negate the little you get in disability. But that was just something that kind of confused me. Your first call, my first thing. And secondly, there is a commercial that is going, that I've seen in Chicago and probably the rest of the state. And it's this nice middle-class family, you know, doing their business, blah, blah, blah. And at the end, this nice woman says, and I support this tax plan because we get $4,000 a year. I wonder if they know that's $76 a week. That's less than, what do you pay for gas a week? How do you pay for your family's food? I mean, I don't know if they're just like, do people just not think about that?
Well, it's also, the $4,000 is also a lie, Lillian. Let's let Congressman Pocan respond to this.
Okay.
Yeah, Lillian. So first of all, on your tax issue, I couldn't tell you your individual situation or most people's individual situations because everyone has a different set of deductions. So, but to the commercial, I was just going to say what Tom did. You know, that's a total lie. That's one of the early lies that Donald Trump put out. You know, whatever group is doing that ad is just totally putting out that to make everyone not notice the giant transfer of wealth they're doing upward. I think now they've come with a more acceptable average, which is around $1,187 or $1,200. It's right around $1,200. And then if you take that and break that out, you can again see what it is per month, per week. But that, again, that's on average. And if you have some of these other deductions, you're not going to see it. And when you have to pay for that $1.5 trillion debt later, you're going to lose other benefits and other things that you might currently have government providing, and you're going to be paying for. So we have to make sure everyone understands the many, many fallacies of this. But that commercial is probably, again, based on the old lie the president put out, and I wouldn't be surprised if it might be a group connected to him.
So let me get this straight. If David Koch gets $1 billion tax cut, and all the rest of us get a $1, and a million of us get a $1 tax cut, that means that the average, or 500,000 of us, no, 1 million of us get a $1 tax cut. That means the average tax cut is $500,000. Am I doing my math right? I think probably not.
I've done mine the other way. I'm not exactly sure, Tom. I just know if you put a billionaire in a room with 100,000 CWA workers, I was on a call with the communication workers,
right.
On average, that is a room of millionaires.
Right, yeah, it's the old joke about Bill Gates walks into a bar.
Yep.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly. So you're right in the concept of the exact number. I'm not going to try to profess to.
But I mean, when they say that the average person is going to get a $1,000 tax cut, you know, they're including the $1 billion in tax cuts that are going to go to the very top, which means that it could be very, very little for the rest of us. But the average, I mean, this is just, you know, fun with numbers.
Yeah, I think the best way to do is really to lay out and give specific examples of here's a family, and just have very typical families, right? You've got very typical families with a mortgage, you know, a house. So where are they on with their deduction of their local taxes and their real estate taxes and their mortgage interest and how many children they have? When you do that, I think people can really get a much better grasp of it.
Yeah, agreed. Kristen in Camas, Washington. Hey, Kristen, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, Congressman. Excuse me. I feel like the progressive movement is just really moving along. We have such a great amount of people, you know, being grassroots activists and really going. How do you feel about how disaffected they are with the Democratic Party, especially after Donna Brazile and what Tom Perez has done? I mean, how are you going to get those people back into the party without really splitting the party? Because that's going to happen if progressives are not included or addressed.
Yeah, so Kristen, so let me present, I guess, how I look at it slightly different is, you know, the party, there's very few people who are actually Democratic Party members in this country. A lot of people may identify as a Democrat or not as any party, but they're progressive and they seem to vote more with the Democrats. What we need to do is you're exactly right. The moment right now is with the progressive movement. The fact that we have over 60% of the Democrats in the House are sponsors of Medicare for All is a very significant development. And while Bernie Sanders just introduced his bill in the Senate, and I think they still have the 17 sponsors, I don't know if it's moved from there, you know, we've had this bill for a long time in the House, but the reason it's at its peak right now is because where the people are at and the movement's at. We just have to keep doing that and don't get lost on, you know, Donna right now is selling a book, okay? She's telling us something that, you know, more will probably come out, but looking backward doesn't move us forward. We need to right now just make sure that we're grabbing this moment. Progressives need to run for office. We need to back progressives who are running in primaries across the country. We need to just really take the energy and move forward because we're having all these victories on defeating a lot of their bills right now, and it's largely because the progressives are the ones who are being the most active and reaching out and doing the activism. So I look at it as this is a very opportunistic, a good opportunity right now we have to get out there and to really make our case and elect more progressives. And I think sometimes when we look backward, we get lost on the goal, which is to get more of our progressive voices there so we can enact progressive policy. So, you know, we'll see what else comes out of the Donna Brazile stuff. But I think, you know, the Democratic Party itself had better understand that the progressive movement is what's carrying it right now. And I think, you know, having people like Keith Ellison as number 2 gives me a lot of comfort in an operation of DNC, although, again, most people will never be a part of a DNC operation.
Yeah, and what I say to Democrats who are flipped out about this is if you don't like the way the DNC is running, become the DNC.
Exactly.
In other words, become a
join the party.
Right, exactly. Become a precinct committee person. Be a decision maker inside the Democratic Party, and you know we can do it. Congressman Mark Pocan, thanks so much for being with us.
Hey, thank you, Tom.
It is great talking with you, and thank you so much. Congressman Mark Pocan, you can reach him at his website, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan. We'll be back with Anything Goes Friday.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. Hey, it's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Cracking the Code, How to Win Hearts, Change Minds, and Restore America's Original Vision. This is from the introduction, page 1. My wife Louise and I live atop 30 feet of water, 100 feet from shore, in a houseboat on a river in Portland, Oregon. Or at least we did when I wrote this book. One day, I stepped out our back door onto the floating deck that serves as our backyard and found myself confronting a very upset Canada goose. He bobbed his head up and down, lifted his wings to make his body look larger and more intimidating, and ran straight at me, hissing and trying to nip at me. Obviously, observing this behavior, my comedian friend Swami Beyondananda, Steve Behrman, who was visiting us that week, named the bird Gooselini. I had no idea why this psycho goose was attacking me, but there was no mistake that Gooselini was trying to communicate. Stay inside that house and don't come out. I got the message, but I didn't stay inside. Instead, every time I went out to water the plants on my deck, I brought a broom with me to fight off Gooselini. I found out what was going on a week later when I learned from my neighbor the female goose had settled on her back deck just a few feet from our own and was sitting on a nest. I realized that Gooselini must have been the proud papa protecting his territory, and I stopped swatting at him with my broom. Gooselini has a lot to tell us about communication strategies. Even though he was just doing what a gander does when he wants a predator to leave, draw attention to himself and away from his mate, attack first and ask questions later, he was able to communicate the go-away part of his message to me pretty well. We all communicate all the time, even when we don't give much thought to what we are saying or how we're saying it. Because Gooselini was unable to use what we would call rational powers of persuasion, he communicated by going straight for the more primitive parts of my brain, the parts we shared as human and goose, the center of our gut feelings. First time Gooselini attacked, I backed off because he was successful in communicating an intent to harm me, which caused me to feel fear, the most primal and visceral of human emotions. The first key to unlocking the communication code is to understand that when we communicate, feeling comes first. Emotions will always trump intellect, at least in the short term. This emotive form of communication, however, ultimately didn't get Gooselini the response he wanted. On its own, the attack wasn't very persuasive. Instead of shooing me away, Gooselini made me angry. Effective communicators know how to get the response they want because they understand how to tailor a message to the person who's listening. They know the second key to unlocking the communication code is that the meaning of a communication is the response you get. Because Gooselini couldn't tell me his story, I had to imagine his story for myself. The first story I came up with was that he was simply a psycho goose trying to harm me for no reason I could understand. Second story I came up with after talking to my neighbor was the story of a dad protecting his soon-to-be hatched goslings. Both stories accurately described what was happening, but the stories led to very different endings. The psycho goose made me angry. The dad goose made me feel protective of Gooselini himself. In this book, I call such stories maps, and the world the stories describe as the territory. The third key to unlocking the communication code is, therefore, the map is not the territory. Each story captures a different piece of reality. No one story captures it all. The key to effective communication is to find the best story to use to convey your understanding of the world to the greatest number of people. In politics, we tell each other stories all the time. Think about it, politics is really nothing more than a large set of stories. The United States of America began as a story that the founders and framers told about a society that could live in harmony around the principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's The country was held together after the Great Depression and through a war by a story told by Franklin Roosevelt, which he called the New Deal. Ronald Reagan told a very different story, one we're still in, that he called the free market story. In Reagan's story, our corporate CEOs should run our society instead of our elected representatives because, as Reagan pointed out and probably believed, quote, the best minds are not in government. If they were, business would hire them away, end of quote from Reagan. Most of the stories we hear in the media today are scary. We're told to be afraid because the world is a bad place and people are untrustworthy. Every goose is a Gooselini without understanding why. These scary stories are profitable to our infotainment industry and to the politicians who are typically allied with the barons of the infotainment industry. There is a different story, however, in which every Gooselini is a proud papa. It is a story of a world that is interconnected and of people who are fundamentally good. This is actually the traditional American liberal story, which has been told and understood since the first telling of it during the Enlightenment by thinkers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, John Locke, and Thomas Jefferson. It's the story that reaches directly back to the founding of this country. My aim with this book is to give you the tools to tell the liberal story and to tell it well. I'll show you how the process of communication is coded, actually hardwired into our brains, and help you crack that code to become a brilliant communicator. First, though, a few concepts it's important to master. Everybody wants the best outcomes, and their behavior reflects the best tools they have to achieve those outcomes. Another way of saying this is that people always make what they think are the best choices given the circumstances and the tools they have. All behavior has at its roots, the goal of a positive outcome. As a practical statement, this means that conservatives and liberals are both working toward the best world possible. And then it goes on from there. How do we differentiate this? How do we communicate this? The book is Cracking the Code. It's about the communication code.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. A lot in the news today. The president has left with his entourage for Hawaii first. He's going to that state where that incredible fraud was committed. That they had a couple give birth to a little baby 50 some odd years ago in Hawaii, and named him Barack Obama just so that they could smuggle into the country from Kenya this guy or whatever. This is the conspiracy theory, right? Let us not forget that birtherism is, I was going to say was a thing, it still is a thing. There are still a lot of Republicans who subscribe to the birther theory that Obama was a fraud, he wasn't really an American, blah, 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 blah. And these are the kind of bizarre conspiracies, not only that brought Donald Trump to the White House, but also that, well, as Doug Perry writes, turned Fox News into the Donald Trump channel. And I'm not sure that there's another way to say it. I mean, it's just it has become the Donald Trump channel. And Doug Perry, he lays out these, conspiracies. Birtherism is the first of the conspiracies that turned Fox into Trump TV, into, GOTV. What Roger Ailes had originally proposed to Richard Nixon. Hey, let's create a television network that only represents the Republican point of view and that takes all the issues of the day and spins them in the context of the Republican point of view. Let's do that. And sure enough, that's what they did. So, but how do they do it? They do it with fear. They do it with frightening conspiracies. They did it with Obama is an evil, phony president who's actually a Muslim, who's actually gay. Yes, Jerome Corsi was on this program promoting his book that said that Obama was, some sort of gay predator. I mean, you just concatenate all the worst frightened stereotypes from the right. The the fears of the homophobes, the hatred of the racists. You throw it all together and boom, toss it out there. So that was birtherism. The second is death panels. Remember death panels? That was rolled out on Fox News by good old Sarah. I mean, the death panels. When Sarah Palin first rolled out the whole death panel thing, and then Chuck Grassley took that and ran with it, it was on Fox News. In fact, PolitiFact called it the 2009 lie of the year. But it worked for them. Then there was Benghazi, another totally invented conspiracy theory. And they milked that for all they could. This is, again, this is a company that represents itself, it's owned by a billionaire, I get that, but it represents itself as an actual news organization. Just going crazy with Benghazi for years and years, hundreds or tens certainly of millions of dollars spent investigating a non-event. The Seth Rich murder, another non-event. You know, people get killed in Washington, D.C. all the time. It's, you know, there are parts of town that just are not all that safe. And Seth Rich was walking down the street and he got shot. But that's it. The deep state. This is Hannity, described by Pulitzer Prize-winning conservative columnist Bret Stephens as Fox News' dumbest anchor. That's interesting. Bret Stephens is the guy that, when the New York Times hired him, I canceled my subscription with them. In any case, has harped on the idea that members of the so-called deep state, entrenched liberal bureaucrats of the federal government, especially in the U.S. intelligence services, are undertaking a soft coup against Donald Trump. So the deep state, the Trump-Russia investigation, they're saying that this is fake news, that this is just, you know, this is a conspiracy. Their conspiracy theory is that they're the victims of a conspiracy. So it's getting very strange. And in the meantime, we've got this tax plan that's coming out of the midst of all this, that is possible because a billionaire started a television network and another billionaire ran for president, and now you've got a bunch of billionaires who back them who are saying, okay, we made this happen, we put this money in, we want our pay, we want our money back. And Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren got together to discuss this. This has gone viral on Twitter. You can find it fairly easily. But I think it's an absolutely fascinating little conversation. It runs about 4 minutes on Twitter, but we've chopped out a couple little pieces of it just for you to get a sense of it. Here's the first one.
Or in fact, you can go to any city in any state in America.
Maybe.
And you ask people, do you think it's a good idea to cut Medicaid by $1 trillion, cut Medicare, cut education, cut environmental protection in order to give $1.9 trillion in tax breaks to the wealthiest people in this country? What percentage of the folks do you think would say, oh yeah, that's a really good idea?
Great idea. I'm afraid we're making real low numbers.
I mean, you'll look at single digits.
Yeah,
okay?
there we are.
And yet, and here is the crisis of our time. Nobody believes that what the Republicans are talking about makes any sense at all. Every poll that we have seen, whether it was health care, whether it's taxes, overwhelming opposition. But there is a group of people, we've got to be honest about this, there is a group of people who think this is a tremendous idea. And those are a handful of billionaire families who in this election cycle will spend many hundreds of millions of dollars to elect the candidates who support this crap.
To elect the candidates who support this crap. Yeah, we have some blunt speaking senators here. Here's one more little clip from that clip. It's a great conversation between Bernie and Elizabeth Warren.
We're talking, once again, about a system that's been rigged right here in Washington. Rigged so that the richest, thinnest slice at the top gets more and more, and they kick dirt in everybody else's face.
And the other thing, it's not only that it makes the rich richer at a time of massive income and wealth inequality, but what it does is it fulfills the Koch brothers' agenda. Their agenda is to basically end every federal program, whether it is Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, public education. They're after privatizing virtually every public program that helps working families in order to make the very, very rich richer. This is the issue of our time. And if we don't rally the American people to stand up and create an economy that works for all of us, not for these guys, this country is going to be in deep, deep trouble.
Yeah, and I would say that we already are. And one of the more interesting things about this tax plan that the Republicans are floating is that an incredible benefit, a tax benefit, goes to, or arguably could go to, people like me and Mark Pocan. Mark owns a print shop in Wisconsin, and he's running it as sub S corp. I own this show. I run it as a sub S corp. So we would qualify for pass-through income. In other words, my top income tax rate will go down from 39% down to 25% under this deal. Now, I can understand as an entrepreneur, as a guy who started a business for the first 3 years, took no income whatsoever, put basically all of our retirement savings into it to start this business. Now we've got most of that money back, but I can understand why I can build a case for why I should pay myself perhaps a little more than I pay some of my employees. But I don't understand why I should get a lower tax rate. What am I doing that's so special that I should be spiffed by the federal government beyond all the other spiffs that I get as a business person? The ability to deduct expenses, the ability to have limited liability, the ability to deduct health care and health insurance. I mean, there's all these wonderful benefits that I get as being a small business. And now Trump wants me to also be able to just avoid taxes?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
To the detriment of everybody else in society? I don't get it. We'll be back. Your call's next. And welcome back. Mark Taylor Canfield in Seattle. Hey, Mark, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's up?
Hey, greetings from the Emerald City.
Is that really the name of Seattle?
Enjoying the show. Good show today, Tom.
Thank you, Mark.
Really?
Is that really the name of Seattle, the Emerald City?
Yes, it is the land of the Wizard of Oz, actually. That is our name. Portland is the Rose City. We're the Emerald City. It is very green here.
Yeah.
But I also wonder if there is a wizard behind the curtain sometimes, and it's probably one of those billionaires you're talking about, although here the billionaires tend to be a little bit more progressive. I'm talking about the Paul Allens and the Bill Gateses and the Jeff Bezos. But, we have our own problem with our crisis of homelessness in Seattle. And so that's being tackled directly by some housing advocates that are running for city council, including John Grant. And we are going to have a female mayor, either Darcy Moon, an urban planner, or Jenny Durkin, a former U.S. attorney, both true progressives. But, yeah, they want to end homelessness and create affordable housing in Seattle. It's a real crisis here, Tom, with the huge developments, real estate developments causing the rents to skyrocket, and people are leaving town in droves. And we have about 10,000 people without permanent residence in Martin Luther King Jr. County. And I'm sure that Dr. King would not be proud of that kind of statistics. But I want to let you know, I am now executive director of Democracy Watch News, which is a nonprofit international news service, and we are dedicated to covering pro-democracy movements around the world. So I'm really excited about that. We're off and running now. I'm still doing my MTC reports at YouTube and writing at the Capitol Hill Times. But today I called you about the Forbidden Stories Project, which is a project that was launched just the other day in Washington, D.C. at the museum by Reporters Without Borders and a group called the Freedom Voices Network. And the reason that they've done this is because there are some really shocking statistics recently about what's happening to journalists around the world. Let me give you a few facts quickly. 42 journalists, 5 non-professional journalists, 8 media workers have been killed this year. Wow. 183 journalists, 169 non-professional journalists, and 13 media workers are currently being detained around the world. And here's the kicker, Tom. More than 700 journalists have been killed in the last 10 years.
As we see the rise of Duterte-style and Erdogan-style authoritarianism across what used to be the small d democratic world, and Trump cheering it on, it seems that being a journalist is one of the most dangerous professions out there now.
Yes, Reporters Without Borders ran a sort of satirical ad campaign last year saying 2016 a great year for dictatorship, 2016 a great year for censorship. Well, that's because of what you just mentioned. And I wanted to let folks know also that according to the Reporters Without Borders World Press Freedom Index for 2017, the United States is currently ranked 43rd in the world in terms of press freedom. So we got a lot of work to do here. It's mostly a corporate, controlled press in the United States, not necessarily a state-run press. But Norway and Sweden are number 1 and number 2, so they probably are good examples to look to. Mm-hmm. But in response to this, alarming crackdown on freedom of the press in many countries around the world, Reporters Without Borders and the Freedom Voices Network launched this project. And the mission of this project is to keep reporting information that's been uncovered by journalists, even if they're imprisoned or killed. Mm. And by the way, the Freedom Voices Project is comprised of some of those folks who brought you the Panama Papers, including Bastian Obermeyer and the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists.
That's great.
They won a Pulitzer Prize.
Well, good luck with that, Mark, and keep us apprised. Keep us up to date on what's going on. Mark Taylor Canfield in Seattle. Thank you, Mark. We'll be back.
On This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity, resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them
in standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here
on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you
24 hours a day,
every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us
raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
Welcome back. And Jeanette in Spirit Lake, Idaho. Hey, Jeanette, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thank you. Well, I was hoping to get to ask a question of Representative Pocan. Unfortunately, I didn't make that. But I think it's really hard to understand how he can sell, this DNC as a new DNC under Tom Perez when he was put in place by the Clinton machine. And they recently pushed out all of the Ellison and Bernie supporters from
they pushed out
positions and
Jeanette,
inserted lobbyists.
Jeanette, they pushed out 3 of them. They didn't push out all of them.
Okay.
They pushed out 3 people.
Right.
The most important was James Zogby, and and I'm concerned about that. But 3 people out of hundreds, maybe thousands. This was not a purge.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll take that. But I live in Idaho, and as as pretty red as the state can get, just about.
Sure.
Where pretty much every conservative that I've talked to agrees that Bernie would have won.
Yeah.
And from what I see here, there's no hope for the Democratic Party here. I mean, what's been happening has done nothing but to, cause distrust. We have a crisis in America, and it's the two-party system. Americans are kind of done with the two-party system. I think the only 50-state solution now will be a new independent party. And I wanted to ask, Representative Pocan, as a real progressive, if he's willing to join us, so many of us, including, recently, just yesterday, Roseanne DeMoro, the head of the, National Nurses United Union, said, "Hey, enough is enough. We need a new party." And even the AFL-CIO has been investigating an independent party. So,
they're not, and they won't.
Who's going to step out? Can we have real progressives actually step out and be willing to start a new party that represents the people? Because, the Democratic Party, no matter how they try to dress them up right now, the emperors have no clothes.
Jeanette, it's a fool's errand.
And it's the kind of thing that billionaires who support the Republican Party would aggressively support, just like they aggressively supported, for example, in 2004, Ralph Nader. And in fact, you know, it was the big criticism on the Nader campaign was that I forget which state it was. I think it might have been Idaho. It might have been Iowa, though. It was one of those states. The Republicans gave the Nader candidate $100 grand, you know, to try to wipe out the Democrat. The reality is that as long as we are stuck with a first past the post, winner take all political system, as long as we don't have proportional representation or instant runoff voting, where you can have multiple parties on a ticket, any effort to create a third party will always hurt the party that's most closely aligned with that third party, and it'll hurt the third party. What we need to do. Go ahead.
This isn't the same America that we had 20 or 30 years ago. You know, this is an America that wants change so bad.
I agree, but we have the same political system, Jeanette.
It's time for we want change. We want change time, and it's not going to happen.
Then get inside the Democratic Party.
The Democratic Party locally isn't going to change anything
It
here.
absolutely will, and it's the only way it's going to happen, Jeanette. And you know, and I'm assuming that you're saying all this sincerely, and that you're not a Republican shill who's trying to promote this to break up and destroy the Democratic Party. But I'm telling you, they're out there. And they are feeding your movement. And I, you know, I saw this back, you know, years, what, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, whatever it was, when you know, I was Larry King and I were moderating the debates on between Jill Stein and Gary, what's his name, and it's like there was all this independent money coming in and supporting this, and you know, it turns out that a lot of it was Republican money. The idea that Democrats need to split away from the party and create a third party is the perfect method to destroy the Democratic Party and to destroy the progressive movement. If you want the progressive movement to be successful, Jeanette, it needs to take over the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is a billion-dollar machine that is sitting there wide open, waiting for somebody to walk in. There's no way you can recreate that in less than 2 or 3 generations, unless the party itself collapses, like the Whig Party did in the 1840s.
This isn't about Democrat versus Republican. The majority of the country now is independent.
That doesn't matter, Jeanette. An independent, a proclaimed independent affiliation doesn't mean that you vote for independent candidates.
The only way to unite our country is going to be under a new independent party.
No, absolutely not.
Now,
that will destroy. That will unite the country, Jeanette. You will have the Republicans will win every election in every state and county if you have a third party, as you're describing, that actually catches a national purchase, that actually gets the national imagination. You are going to see Republicans absolutely and totally consolidate their power all over this country, because you will be splitting the vote. You know, I saw this in Vermont. We had when Louise and I first moved to Vermont in the late 1990s. There was an election. A guy named Anthony Polina, good progressive. There's a third party in Vermont. It's called the Progressive Party, and it's a really good party. And Anthony Polina is a good guy. He was a great legislator, and he ran for governor on the progressive ticket, while a really great Democrat ran on the Democratic ticket. And between the two of them, they got way over 50% of the vote. In fact, my recollection is they got over 60% of the vote. But Vermont ended up with a Republican governor and an attorney general, specifically because that third party was in the race. Jeanette, it's a mistake. Thank you for the call. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of your calls in just a moment.
Hey, it's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Cracking the Code, How to Win Hearts, Change Minds, and Restore America's Original Vision. This is from the introduction, page 1. My wife Louise and I live atop 30 feet of water, 100 feet from shore, in a houseboat on a river in Portland, Oregon. Or at least we did when I wrote this book. One day, I stepped out our back door onto the floating deck that serves as our backyard and found myself confronting a very upset Canada goose. He bobbed his head up and down, lifted his wings to make his body look larger and more intimidating, and ran straight at me, hissing and trying to nip at me.
Obviously, observing this behavior, my comedian friend Swami Beyondananda, Steve Behrman, who was visiting us that week, named the bird Gooselini. I had no idea why this psycho goose was attacking me, but there was no mistake that Gooselini was trying to communicate. Stay inside that house and don't come out. I got the message, but I didn't stay inside. Instead, every time I went out to water the plants on my deck, I brought a broom with me to fight off Gooselini. I found out what was going on a week later when I learned from my neighbor that a female goose had settled on her back deck just a few feet from our own and was sitting on a nest. I realized that Gooselini must have been the proud papa protecting his territory, and I stopped swatting at him with my broom. Gooselini has a lot to tell us about communication strategies. Even though he was just doing what a gander does when he wants a predator to leave, draw attention to himself and away from his mate, attack first and ask questions later, he was able to communicate the go-away part of his message to me pretty well. We all communicate all the time, even when we don't give much thought to what we are saying or how we're saying it. Because Gooselini was unable to use what we would call rational powers of persuasion, he communicated by going straight for the more primitive parts of my brain, the parts we shared as human and goose, the center of our gut feelings. First time Gooselini attacked, I backed off because he was successful in communicating an intent to harm me, which caused me to feel fear, the most primal and visceral of human emotions. The first key to unlocking the communication code is to understand that when we communicate, feeling comes first. Emotions will always trump intellect, at least in the short term. This emotive form of communication, however, ultimately didn't get Gooselini the response he wanted. On its own, the attack wasn't very persuasive. Instead of shooing me away, Gooselini made me angry. Effective communicators know how to get the response they want because they understand how to tailor a message to the person who's listening. They know the second key to unlocking the communication code is that the meaning of a communication is the response you get. Because Gooselini couldn't tell me his story, I had to imagine his story for myself. The first story I came up with was that he was simply a psycho goose trying to harm me for no reason I could understand. Second story I came up with after talking to my neighbor was the story of a dad protecting his soon-to-be hatched goslings. Both stories accurately described what was happening, but the stories led to very different endings. The psycho goose made me angry. The dad goose made me feel protective of Gooselini himself. In this book, I call such stories maps, and the world the stories describe as the territory. The third key to unlocking the communication code is, therefore, the map is not the territory. Each story captures a different piece of reality. No one story captures it all. The key to effective communication is to find the best story to use to convey your understanding of the world to the greatest number of people. In politics, we tell each other stories all the time. Think about it, politics is really nothing more than a large set of stories. The United States of America began as a story that the founders and framers told about a society that could live in harmony around the principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The country was held together after the Great Depression and through a war by a story told by Franklin Roosevelt, which he called the New Deal. Ronald Reagan told a very different story, one we're still in, that he called the free market story. In Reagan's story, our corporate CEOs should run our society instead of our elected representatives because, as Reagan pointed out and probably believed, quote, the best minds are not in government. If they were, business would hire them away, end of quote from Reagan. Most of the stories we hear in the media today are scary. We're told to be afraid because the world is a bad place and people are untrustworthy. Every goose is a Gooselini without understanding why. These scary stories are profitable to our infotainment industry and to the politicians who are typically allied with the barons of the infotainment industry. There is a different story, however, in which every Gooselini is a proud papa. It is a story of a world that is interconnected and of people who are fundamentally good. This is actually the traditional American liberal story, which has been told and understood since the first telling of it during the Enlightenment by thinkers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, John Locke, and Thomas Jefferson. It's the story that reaches directly back to the founding of this country. My aim with this book is to give you the tools to tell the liberal story and to tell it well. I'll show you how the process of communication is coded, actually hardwired into our brains, and help you crack that code to become a brilliant communicator. First, though, a few concepts it's important to master. Everybody wants the best outcomes, and their behavior reflects the best tools they have to achieve those outcomes. Another way of saying this is that people always make what they think are the best choices given the circumstances and the tools they have. All behavior has at its roots
the goal of a positive outcome. As a practical statement, this means that conservatives and liberals are both working toward the best world possible. And then it goes on from there. How do we differentiate this? How do we communicate this? The book is Cracking the Code. It's about the communication code. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. The headline, Ivanka is packing, actually it's Eleanor Gardner is tweeting this. Ivanka is packing them in while prepping Japan for her dad's visit. And then you look at the photograph and there's Ivanka up on the stage and there's maybe 1/5 of the room is filled with people. Most of it's empty chairs. So what a surprise. Albert in Marina Del Rey, California. Hey, Albert, what's on your mind today?
For taking my call, Tom. I wanted to talk about the tax plan and how the Republicans tout it as it's going to help the economy. And what people don't realize is we run a trade deficit. So any money we get back when we run a trade deficit, which I believe last year totaled about $502 billion, that's how much money leaves the economy.
Right.
So in order to replace that money, or let's just say I get a tax cut and 20% of our money is spent on items not made in America, we're boosting other people's economies and not really doing anything to help ourselves. If they really wanted to help the economy, and most of our trade deficit is with China, they would do something, for instance, like the electric vehicle tax that they're just getting rid of, or subsidy. China just said they're gonna get rid of all gas cars by 2050. We already know that they subsidize their businesses. There's this thing called game theory where you have to compete against each other. If one person does something one way and we do something the other way that's a negative, that's not a benefit for us. I mean, these Republicans just are ruining our economy, and it's right here in front of our faces, and somebody needs to do something about this.
Yeah, I'm with you, Albert. I'm absolutely with you, and I think that frankly, somebody is going to do something about this. I don't think this tax legislation is going to be able to pass. But, you know, we'll see where it goes. We're certainly going to oppose it here. Albert, thank you for the call. Charles in Southgate, California. Hey, Charles, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Tom, you shouldn't give Lynette such a hard time. I know things do change slowly, especially within a political party, or, you know, even trying to get another political party.
But see, if you want to have a third political party, I mean, if there's actually a strong argument for a third, for a progressive political party, it already exists. It's the Green Party, and you know, it's if enough people, you know, volunteered and stepped in, they could take it over. But you know, my point and what I was saying to her is that, you know, what did the Green Party do? I mean, you know, it's.
Well, I know that's really not my point.
Yeah.
I was wanting to talk to Congressman Pocan about the Randy Bryce race. I got an email from, I guess, a friend of yours, because he used to do your show, Hal Lawson at Social Security Works, and donated a little bit of money with the expressed, you know, intention of trying to remove Paul Ryan from his seat. And here recently, I got an email from Randy Bryce inviting me to a dinner over here in Beverly Hills. I think that the prices start out about $250 a piece. They're not going to be drinking Kool-Aid there, I believe. They may not be drinking $450 bottles of wine, but, you know, it's a pretty richy fundraiser. And then I'm getting stuff from Anthony Reardon, who is the head of the Assembly here in California, who, when the Senate passed the Health for All bill here, he put it on the shelf. And he's specifically telling me that he protects and improves health care for all. I mean, a big old page ad that I got in the mail.
Yeah.
It kind of makes you wonder, you know, where everybody's coming from.
Well,
Even if, you know, you tend to vote Democratic, you got to be real careful about who you pick within the party.
Yeah, I get that, Charles, but I'm really surprised by the number of callers I'm getting who are doing these subtle, soft critiques. I'm seeing the same thing on Twitter. All these people who are essentially trolling us, and you look at them and they've got like 10 10 followers. You know, it's an account that's put out 30 tweets, and it's like there's something weird going on. Al in Buffalo, New York. Hey, Al, what's on your mind today?
Hey, I just got to say, in a moment of time when we are at a critical mass of, people being basically exasperated, stupefied, mortified, I'm going to say all those words that mean I would go right to the word the words incomprehensible demoralization. People are waiting for the outcome of this investigation, okay? Tom, people want to know what did Facebook do? Where did the leaks come from, and how did it happen?
Yeah, and what I want to know, and I'm not hearing anybody address, is where did those rubles come from?
Exactly.
That were used to buy those ads. Did they come from the Russian government, or did they come from Paul Manafort?
Right, and there is just so much. Okay, people. I'd like to say this to the rancid sector of the far left. Did we not forget what the 111th Congress did under President Obama when they passed the first-time homebuyers credit, and the Credit Card Reform Act, and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and the Recovery and Reinvestment Act, the restructuring of the auto industry, and the FDA Modernization Act, Tom, the Trade Enforcement Agency, the Wall Street Reform Act, weatherization programs. What part of progressive does that not? I mean, I don't understand these people.
Yeah.
It's almost like their unreasonable expectations have reached a point where they're completely. I don't know what they expect from a progressive party. I really don't get it. Donna Brazile, she should be ashamed of herself. As far as Senator Sanders, wrong place, wrong time.
Okay.
Senator Sanders once he stepped over that blue line, he should have never stepped back. And he is responsible. He's grossly negligent for what is going on right now.
Yeah, Al, I completely disagree. But you're entitled to your perspective. Vicky in Roseville, California. Hey, Vicky, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hey, Tom. Thank you for taking my call.
Vicky, I can hardly hear you.
Yeah, I don't know why I can't hear you really well, but my question, Tom, is going back to this recent killings in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the question that I have is, unfortunately, our country is divided, whether we like it or not. We have our liberals and we have our conservatives.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody has their thoughts on that. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, just fine.
Okay, great. So my question is, why are we looking at this as this gentleman who came into our country, most likely illegally, and killed 8 people, injured 11 people, and is now requesting to have the ISIS flag available to him? He clearly admitted what he did. Why do we give people like that a fair trial? Because I know on the conservative side, we don't look at it that way.
Because, Vicky, you might be the next person who's charged with a crime. You ever read Franz Kafka?
No.
The conservative position on the power of the state, the conservative position on the power of the state is that the power of the state, because it has the power to deprive you of both life and liberty. It has the state has the power to execute you, and the state has the power to imprison you. And therefore, that power, which is an absolute power, the ability to end your life, that power has to be very, very tightly circumscribed, which means that the rights of the guilty before their guilt has been established are as important as the rights of the innocent, because some of the guilty before their guilt has been established may be not guilty. This guy, it's fairly obvious he's guilty. He still deserves and should get the full benefit of our criminal justice system. Otherwise, how can we call ourselves a civilized country?
Oh, I understand that we all want to be politically correct.
I'm not talking about politically correct, Vicky. I'm talking about the foundational concepts of democracy and self-governance. I'm talking about what John Locke was talking about in 1674 when he was writing the Second Treatise on Government. I'm talking about what Thomas Hobbes was writing about in 1635 in Leviathan. This concept that if justice is, it used to be justice was only available to the lords and ladies, only available to the very wealthy, only available to the ruling class. And the great American innovation was that justice is available to everybody. That's the 14th Amendment. Equal protection under the law is available to everybody. And when you step away from that and you start saying, you know, we've decided this guy, it's so obvious he's guilty, we don't even need to do the process anymore. Once you do that with anybody, no matter how guilty they are, once you do that, you're setting up the possibility that the next person that gets done to could be Vicky because she made a call into a talk show host. Vicky?
Yeah. So I hear clearly what you're saying, and I do agree with the way that we've set things up in our law on some levels. But we clearly have a problem here in our country where people are coming over here and they're taking advantage of that right because they know that the consequences are pretty light.
Well, this guy's going to have either, this guy is set for the death penalty. When he was arraigned yesterday or the day before, they read into the charges that they were death penalty charges. How is that light?
When is the last person that you know of, Tom, that actually went to death?
You know, it happens every few weeks. It's happening all over the country constantly, and I'm opposed to it. I mean, he's also facing life in prison. What's light about life in prison, particularly given how brutal the American prison system is? It's one of the most brutal in the developed world.
No. Obviously, you haven't worked in the prison system. I have, and they get 3 square meals a day. They get to go out and have their freedoms outside. They can have phones. They can have television. They can have all of the benefits that a lot of our homeless and our elderly people and our veterans do not get. So
you want to treat prisoners like animals?
Well, I want to treat them like they've treated the other people, because let me ask you this.
See, that's not criminal justice. That's revenge. Vicki, thank you for the call. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Is there a full moon? Is it a full moon? It really is? Okay, thank you, Sean. We'll be back. And welcome back. Leonard in South Pasadena, California. Hey, Leonard, thanks for watching Free Speech on DirecTV. What's on your mind today?
Well, hi, Tom. My interest here is racist. This is how the greedy people keep their money. They keep people separated and hating each other, and so we never get together and say, hey, quit taking our money.
Yeah. Well, I pointed this out the other day in response to a caller that it's not just racism, that for all of capitalist civilization, for all of modern Western civilization, going back 7,000 years, rich people have figured out a way to maintain political power and to maintain their wealth. And in order to do that, you have to have a certain number of people who are very poor. I mean, it's just that at a certain level, it is a zero-sum game. There's a certain amount of food, there's a certain amount of resources. And it's just that, you know, historically, within societies where you had relatively homogeneous societies, or heterogeneous societies, rather, what you found was that people, they would come up with reasons why these people that are being kept in poverty are being kept in poverty. Oh, they're not intellectually competent, or oh, they're not well trained, or oh, they came from that part of town, or whatever. And racism is just the latest version of that. It's not the latest. I mean, it's been around forever, but it's the laziest version of that. It's not even meritocratic. I mean, in the United States, we arguably have this mythology that we're a meritocracy and that the people who have risen to the top are there because they deserve to be there. Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg are the smartest guys in the block. It may or may not be true, but that's our mythology. And we've used that to justify extreme wealth on the top and extreme poverty on the bottom. So we've got a bunch of these little stories that we tell ourselves, but the racist story is the most criminal of all of them, which is to say we're going to deprive a group of people of the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We're going to deprive them simply because of the color of their skin. It's cheap, it's easy, it's destructive. It's insanely destructive. Am I making sense, Leonard?
Yeah, I just wanted to say also that they're really helping the very wealthy, maintain their wealth by keeping us apart. And I would think that they should get at least paid from the billionaires. They're not getting any money from these guys. They're doing their work and not getting a dime out of it.
Who's the they you're talking about?
The racist, the people who actually believe that they're better than somebody else.
Oh, yeah. Well,
the ones, a lot of poor people.
The ones who can limit their racist appeals to dog whistles, to doing things like going to Philadelphia, Mississippi, where Cheney, Schwimmer, and Goodman were murdered, you know, the 3 civil rights workers back in the 60s, going to Philadelphia, Mississippi, and giving your first speech as a candidate for president at the Neshoba County Fair, you know, which is to 20,000 white people, which is what Ronald Reagan did in 1980, and it's what Donald Trump Jr. did last year. His first speech out on the trail was at that same county fair, same speech, talking about states' rights, you know, just dog whistling their way all the way into it. And you say that the racists are not getting any money. The racists who use dog whistle, like Donald Trump Jr. did, like Ronald Reagan did, they're getting piles of money from these people. Because the billionaire class understands that, as you point out, Leonard, if they can keep us hating each other, if they can keep average people, you know, working people, economically average people, hating each other because of things like the color of their skin or the gender with which they identify, they win and we lose. Leonard, thank you for the call. And welcome back. Let's check in with Patrick Gavin with Talk Media News. Hey, Patrick. This report,
how are you?
Great. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, a new book by Ellen Ratner. So, Patrick, what's going on in the world today?
Well, as you know, the Republican Party unveiled their tax reform bill yesterday. You know, I think that yesterday was probably the best day for them out of this entire process. The Republican Party, at least outwardly, looked very enthusiastic about it. But now is really the point when Washington really starts picking this thing apart, which is happening as we speak. I mean, some of the highlights or lowlights of the bill, for those who haven't had a chance to look at it, I mean, the proposal would limit the mortgage interest deduction, cap state and local tax deductions. It doesn't change, but we talked this a while ago because it came up during an interview with Trump. Trump said he would oppose anything that would limit the amount that you can deduct from your taxes based on 401k plans. The bill that we saw yesterday doesn't do that, and I think that's right. And, you know, I think it's a large part, I think, due to what
but
Trump
it's doing
said.
away with your ability to deduct student loans. It's doing away with your ability to deduct really high medical expenses, which accounted last year for over 500,000 bankruptcies in the United States. At least that used to be tax deductible. Basically, it looks like the, quote, loopholes that the Trumpistas, the Trumpettes, have gotten rid of are all loopholes that benefit, you know, average families and middle-class people and people in trouble, frankly, you know, huge medical expenses. And the benefits and the loopholes that they're retaining, they're actually adding loopholes. They're increasing the ability of companies to do accelerated depreciation, for example. I mean, they're adding loopholes for businesses. They're taking away loopholes for, you know, average working people. This does not seem like a good idea.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, some of them are truly quite sort of head-scratching. I mean, obviously, as you know, even if you sort of take the idea that this is largely a gift to wealthy Americans, you know, there's things like getting rid of the adoption tax credit that don't exactly, you know, make sense, or certainly seem cruel. You know, I mean, obviously, a big part of it is that, you know, they do have this $1.5 trillion that they can own, within which they need to work, which is that this thing can only cost $1.5 trillion, and so that's why they're having to give away some of these tax credits. But you're right; they tend to kind of skew in favor of most wealthy Americans. You know, I think what's going to be interesting is obviously they have to sell this thing. You know, and I think that one of the ways they're going to try to do that is by I think explaining how it's a tax break for the middle class. You know, and there are parts, and you know, there are ways in which members of the middle class will have their taxes lowered under this. But then there's also ways in which their taxes would go higher. I mean, there was a tax study, I believe, put out yesterday by TaxBrain, which is this economic modeling software, that said that in fact there's about 13 million tax filers, and I'm not quite sure what their criteria was under this, who would actually see their taxes being raised These are folks who make $100,000 a year or less. And so, it'll be interesting to see if they truly do try to sell it as that. I obviously think they will expect that.
Well, and they've got, now there's a group, a billionaire-funded group in Illinois that's running ads right now saying if you're a middle-class worker, you're going to get $4,000 out of this deal, which is a complete lie. But it's a lie that one think tank put out in a paper that they got published in one newspaper. So now they can run an ad, arguably attributing that number to the newspaper or to some credible organization. It's bizarre. What they're pulling out all the stops here to sell this thing to the American people.
Yeah, and I think one other thing to keep your eye on, especially over the weekend. I mean, so the lawmakers are all heading home today, which of course means they're going to hear from business communities and constituents over the weekend. And I'll be curious to see if anybody comes back with any shift in their thinking come Monday. But one thing that's being talked about in the Capitol is this idea of actually including a repeal of the individual mandate in the House Republican tax bill, which of course is a very, yet again, one more way of sort of gutting Obamacare. But the fact of the matter is that, in this bill, Republicans are going to need to save as much revenue as they can since these tax cuts are so big. And so, of course, one way to do that, repealing the individual mandate, would give them $400 billion more dollars to play with. So
because it means that a number of people equal to $400 billion are going to lose or drop their health insurance.
Yep, exactly.
Which is nuts. I mean, if that's our national goal to get the whatever million of people it's going to, however many millions of people it's going to take to add up to $40 billion or something like that. If our national goal now is to get that many millions of people to not have health insurance, we've completely slipped through the rabbit hole. We're in an upside down universe.
I think a lot of what this bill is doing is sort of trying to clog up a dam with just your finger. I mean it's just the water's just going to come out some other way. So by doing that they will save $400 billion. So they will accomplish their goal of getting this bill passed in terms of getting it under that 1.5 trillion cap. But you're right. Then it means that individuals are going to have to shell out more money for.
Well, and there's still $1.5 trillion that they're borrowing to pay for their tax break for their billionaires, and that $1.5 billion over a 20, 30-year period is going to become $2 or $3 billion with interest. This is nuts.
It is a bit of a mess, and I think I think looking forward, I do have to say I think it's probably a safe bet that this will pass the House. I think as we've seen over the past year, the Senate's going to be the real problem area. I mean, assuming that no Democrats get on board, the Republican Party can again only lose 2 votes before this tax bill tanks. Susan Collins has already kind of planted her flag in the sand as being someone who's skeptical about this. I think also look at Bob Corker, John McCain, Jeff Flake, some of the sort of the standard folks. Those are the folks that they're going to have to woo over.
Yeah, it's going to be real interesting. So what else is going on in the world, Patrick? Do I understand that Bo Bergdahl was dishonorably discharged but isn't going to go to jail?
That's exactly right. They announced that today. I think it came as a bit of a surprise to most people. I think that I think the assumption was that he would do jail time. But the announcement coming out today that he would do no prison time for leaving his post back in June of 2009. I believe President Trump tweeted about it today, actually calling the decision a complete and total disgrace. So that's that's Trump's perspective.
I mean, you don't think being a prisoner of the Taliban, tortured and whatnot for 5 years is enough punishment for a stupid mistake? That's incredible. Patrick Gavin with Talk Media News. Patrick, thank you for the call.
Take care.
And the report. I much appreciate it. Yeah, thank you. We'll be back. It's our Anything Goes day, so whatever topic is up for you. I've got a few things here, too. Very, very interesting what Paul LePage just did in Maine.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. We're reading today in the Thom Hartmann University Book Club from Threshold, the progressive plan to pull America back from the brink. This is Chapter 3, page 53. It's titled Population. Sometime between mid-2007 and mid-2008, China exceeded the United States as the single largest emitter of carbon dioxide, dumping an estimated 7 billion tons of CO2 into the atmosphere per year in 2008, compared with the U.S. estimated 6.2 billion tons that year. But China is a vast and populous country. On a per-person basis, Americans are still the most profligate producers of carbon dioxide, with the average American in 2008 directly responsible for around 19.4 tons of greenhouse gas, not to mention the portion of China's emissions that went to make products shipped to and consumed by Americans. Russia, with its less than modern industrial infrastructure, comes in second at around 11.8 tons per person. It's a cold country, and few homes are truly winterized. Then the European Union at 8.6 tons per person, and China at 5.1 tons per person. India, which is rapidly industrializing, is still one of the most efficient per-person nations in the world at 1.8 tons of CO2 per person per year. Although that's because much of the country is so poor they don't have cars, the winters don't require much heat except in the extreme north, and the focus of India's industrialization has been digital rather than manufacturing. The largest driver of all these processes that are tearing our planet apart and putting all life at risk is the increase in human biomass. There are roughly 1 trillion pounds of human flesh on the planet right now, and assuming a worldwide average food consumption of around 3 pounds per person, in the U.S. it's almost 5 per day, we're consuming around 7 trillion pounds of food per year. One result of this is that over half of the entire net productive capacity of the planet, the entire planet's ability to produce edible products from photosynthesis, is now used up, displaced, or wiped out by humans, leaving every other life form on Earth to compete for the leftovers. Our population growth has not been particularly even. In the first 100,000 years of human history, we averaged around 20 to 50 million people total. 60,000 or so years ago, as we moved out of Africa and began to cover the world, we crept up to a few hundred million by the time of Christ, 2,000 years ago. Around the time of the Crusades, when the world was, by most definitions, pretty well populated, we were coming into conflict with each other all over the world. There were only 500 million of us on the entire planet. Not long after the American Revolution, we hit our first billion humans on planet Earth in 1800. The second billion didn't take 165,000 years. We doubled our population in just 130 years, hitting 2 billion in 1930, just as the United States was sliding into the Republican Great Depression. But that economic debacle didn't slow the growth of human numbers. By the year JFK was sworn in, just 30 years later, the planet had added another billion humans. The growth in population was driven largely by cheap, abundant oil and fertilizer and pesticides made from it, the farm and transportation equipment fueled by it, and the processing, packaging, and distribution system made possible by oil that lets a person in Iowa have a lunch of tilapia fish grown in ponds in China, lettuce and tomatoes grown in Mexico, wine imported from France, and a fruit cup of berries imported from Chile and strawberries from Nicaragua. In this environment of relatively abundant food, even in the third world, our 4th billion took us only 14 years to add, 1974. Our 5th billion only 13 years, 1987. And our 6th billion only 12 years, 1999. As oil became more expensive, raising the price of food indirectly, since most of us are actually eating oil, population growth first began to slow in the first decade of the 21st century. Part of this was attributable to birth rate declines in developed countries, part to an explosion in the death rates because of TB and AIDS in the third world,
part to famine and associated diseases in sub-Saharan Africa as deserts moved south due to global warming. But while growth is slowing, we're still adding people at a rate many times faster than just 3 centuries ago. Topsoil all over the world is vanishing. Transportation is becoming exponentially more expensive. And as human population density increasingly resembles the inside of a petri dish, diseases ranging from TB, more than 1 billion people are infected, and more die from that than any other cause worldwide, to AIDS, to the constantly mutating common cold and related corona and flu viruses, remember SARS, represent a menace that is dramatically amplified by the 1 trillion pounds of human flesh such diseases inhabit. We are not the first culture to reach this threshold of population versus resources. As I discussed at length later in this book, the Maori of New Zealand, a group of Polynesian explorers, are a prime example of a culture that, like the Europeans who discovered America, thought they had found a land of unlimited wealth and food, but ultimately learned that there is a limit to growth, the biosphere, and that when you unthinkingly hit that limit, life can become hellish and democracy nearly impossible. But the concept of a limit to growth, or a finite world, was largely unknown to the classical economists on whose assumptions, formulas, and work our modern economy is organized. In fact, the classical and neoclassical economists, from Malthus to Jean-Baptiste Say to Marx to Friedman, would suggest that the Maori hit the limit not of their biosphere, the ability of the land of New Zealand to produce food, but of their technology. They would correctly point out that today New Zealand houses several million more people than it did when that island nation was entirely populated by Maori. And modern technology has ensured that not only is there enough food, but that surplus agricultural land has been turned to a growing of fuel and medicinal crops. The book is Threshold. And hidden.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and picking up your calls for the day. It's anything goes weekend, let's call it. David in Ketchum, Idaho. Hey, David, what's on your mind?
Good afternoon. Yes, I'm just listening to your fine talk about the Shoshone, and this is where Bo Bergdahl grew up in this central Idaho county, and he was very self-reliant. I would call him idealistic, which is not a good place to be if you're in the Army. And I'm really happy that they gave him no prison time. And we had a poll for the local newspaper, and they asked if Bo Bergdahl should have time in prison or not. And surprisingly, 400 people said yes, he should, and 255 said no.
Yeah. But they hadn't heard the same testimony that was presented before this military court. I mean, when a UCMJ, Uniform Code of Military Justice, when a military court hears your case and decides for leniency, you know that there's something substantial there that argues for leniency, because the military courts tend to be more punitive, shall we say, than civilian courts, and that's what Bo Bergdahl was facing. So I'm guessing that the stories of the torture and whatnot that he endured under the Taliban were sufficiently gruesome that they said, okay, this guy has been punished enough. It seems to make perfect sense. David, thank you for the call. Well said. Larry in Elmo, Washington. Hey, Larry, what's on your mind today?
Yes.
Larry?
Yeah.
Hey, you're on the air.
Oh, I am? Okay. I'm from Elmo, Washington.
Okay.
So, where can I start?
Okay. Larry, thanks for the call. Rich in Greenwood, Indiana. Hey, Rich, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thanks a lot. I'd like to start by quoting Plato. Those who tell the stories shape the society.
Yeah.
And let us not forget that courage is the first virtue. Ta-Nehisi Coates has a new title out, We Were 8 Years in Power, An American Tragedy. And he got to talk about that a month and a day ago on CBS Late Night with Stephen Colbert. And he was describing how unpopular movements are the point of dissent. There's no need for a demonstration for something popular.
Right.
The status quo doesn't need a cheering section, although the Powell memo did a very good job of creating that. But if we're about progress, if we're about bettering our condition for everyone, then the idea of a demand for change does not start out as being popular.
Right.
The specific detail that Mr. Coates gave was his detail on how Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was only 40% supported with agreement. He was a 60% disagree with his ideas and his efforts.
Well, the American Revolution was only 30 to 40% agreed with when it happened. I mean, you know, this is one of the reasons why the founders enshrined the right to protest in the First Amendment, because the Revolutionary War was a protest.
Right on. You know, I mean, how do you're bringing forward that that reading from the last survivor of the Boston Tea Party. That's just so illuminating about this idea of dissent.
Yeah.
You know, you do it because stuff is wrong against us, and you know, I think that it's really important for us to start in terms of our what do we do right now. Let's think about holding more than one idea in our head at a time as permissible, but let's also focus on 2018.
Yeah. Yeah,
you know,
I'm with you, and we need to be doing that. We absolutely need to be doing that. Rich, thanks for the call. By the way, this weekend, Guy Fawkes Day. Never remember the 5th of November, the gunpowder treason and plot. I know of no reason why the gunpowder treason should ever be forgot. Guy Fawkes and his companions did the scheme contrived to blow the king and Parliament all up alive. 70 barrels laid low to prove old England's overthrow, but by God's providence, him they catch with a dark lantern lighting a match, a stick and a stake for King James' sake. If you won't give me one, I'll take two, the better for me and the worse for you. A rope to hang the Pope, a pennyworth of cheese to choke him, a pint of beer to wash it down, and a jolly good fire to burn him. Hola boys, make the bells ring. God save the king. Hip, hip, hooray. Right. So, anyhow, most Americans are just familiar with Guy Fawkes masks, but Guy Fawkes was the bad guy. So, although we seem to celebrate him, I don't know. Go figure. Vince in Knoxville, Tennessee. Hey, Vince, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for having me on.
Sure. What's on your mind?
Hey, quite a bit. I wish I had all day, but anyway, there are a couple of things here. First of all, I think the Dems are, you know, they've done such a poor job, and they continue to do a poor job in their messaging and communicating to ordinary people. You know, you may say what you want about the Donald, but I'm telling you, even in his very, very limited linguistic, you know, abilities, the guy can connect and communicate with ordinary people by his song bites. For example, you know, I mean, like Obamacare and Crooked Hillary, those are the kinds of things somebody that connect. And what I would, you know, if I had to make some recommendations or to advise my politicians, like for example, this old tax plan, the way that I would craft it is, you know, I would say it over and over. This here is a get Trump family richer scheme. And rather than even saying it's for billionaires, I would connect it directly to Donald Trump. For example, you know, this morning I was, you know, listening, or I was on watching television. And the Republicans, the guys who, the crafters of this budget, not the budget of the tax scheme, they're coming up with this example of that an ordinary family, $59,000, they're going to get a $1,000-something. Well, the Dems should be ready to counter and say, here, look at Donald Trump. Look at what Donald Trump is going to be getting.
Right.
And connected directly to him. And I think that's the way you could communicate with people rather than getting into these sophisticated and analytical, too much analysis, and elitist way, you lose people. And I think that's the way you ought to, and I think that's really, I saw the commercials going way back during the elections and the way that folks are communicating on the Dem side. And I think that's where Donald Trump is really, really, taking advantage of that unique skill that he has. And the guy doesn't have that's his only ammo. Well, we should be learning from that. And
I don't think it's a matter of learning from it, Vince. The Democrats are not going to pick up lying as a way of winning political arguments, number one, which is what Trump and the Republicans are doing. Number two, you're going to see enormous, hundreds of millions of dollars spent on advertising all around the country in support of this tax plan, because the billionaires are going to make billions from it, and the big corporations are going to make hundreds of billions from it. And so, they're going to invest millions or hundreds of millions of dollars in passing this legislation. And that is just not a good thing for any of us. But Vince, you're right. We need to be calling it the Trump tax plan. Thanks.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Or the Trump tax cut. Or Donald Trump gets $1 billion tax cut. Except we don't know the numbers because we haven't seen his taxes. We'll be back. Welcome back. Steve in Blacksburg, Virginia. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I've got multiple topics I'm going to try to string together in about 4 sentences.
Okay.
First, I was very sad about the tragedy in New York last week, but I've been waiting for the NRA to say the only way to stop a bad guy with a truck is with a good guy with a truck.
Ha! Okay.
And then, they keep saying it's not guns, it's mental health. Then the Republicans get elected and slash mental health care, like here in Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
And can you imagine what they will be slashing if they pass this so-called tax reform bill?
Yeah, everything. I mean, anything that helps people, right? Anything that helps corporations, that'll be fine, and we're going to actually add to the number of loopholes that corporations have. And, but we're going to do away with those loopholes that are used by average Americans. And you're right, the Republicans, they love to talk about mental health care when it comes to shootings, but when it comes to paying for mental health care, no, there's no need for that.
But please remind everybody that here in Virginia we've got a governor's election just next Tuesday. And
right.
we got to make sure that Northam wins.
Yeah, I agree. Ed Gillespie has run one of the most toxic and destructive campaigns, I think, in the history of Virginia,
he's
in modern
history.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said, Steve. Thank you for the call. Well said. Clark in Concal, California. Am I saying that right, Clark?
Yeah, that's correct.
So what's up?
How are you doing, Tom?
I'm fine. What's on your mind today?
Good. All right, I've got a couple of things I wanted to bring up.
We ask people to pick one, please.
Okay.
Call with one
Democratic
topic.
Party. It's a great machine, and it needs some responsible, progressive people at the controls. However, the name is kind of throwing people off because of the recent history of that party. It's a great party. It's got a wonderful history in the past, but the most recent history is not all that good, and that's what's going to stand out in people's minds. So I was listening earlier where you were talking about, you had callers calling in and talking about, well, you need a new party, this, that, and the other, and you brought up the point, no, we've already got the party. It's established. We just need to take it back, and that's a great concept. But the problem with that in people's heads is taking back and using that name when it brings up some most recent bad history that's attached to that party.
We're calling ourselves liberals again, Clark, and after back in the 80s when Limbaugh had spent, or in the 90s, when Limbaugh had spent a decade trashing the word liberal to the point that no Democratic politician in America would call himself a liberal. We've rehabilitated that term from right-wing trash talk. I think, you know, rehabilitating the Democratic Party is not going to be that big a deal. And there's a lot of people who are still very committed to the Democratic Party, including me.
And I as well. But, you know, it's just the younger people, you know, they've got this whole, well, this happened, and it's only been within the past few years, and that we've got to be able to go beyond that.
Well, yeah, a lot of it's coming out of the Hillary-Bernie wars.
The more past history of the Democratic Party, all the great things that were done by the Democrats.
Yeah, yeah.
And then move it forward under that banner. And also, just another quick thing, I know it probably won't do any good, and I know that you are working hard with your program, but I really would be on board with a Thom Hartmann Tulsi Gabbard ticket for 2020. I know, you're working hard at your program, but come on, you tell us to get out there and get active. So
Tulsi's
why
great.
not?
Well, this is my form of get active. It's right here doing this. But Clark, thanks for your kind words. And a salute to Tulsi Gabbard. She's fighting the good fight. We'll be back.
Hi there, I'm Marie with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving donations, volunteering, or spreading the word about Free Speech TV, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to exist. And for that, I want to say thank you. Now you can give to the network powered by the people by donating an unwanted or used vehicle through our Vehicles of Change program. If you have an old car, RV, or even a motorcycle, Free Speech TV can use it to grow and thrive. You can make a bigger difference in supporting Free Speech TV by giving an old car. It's a great way to support the network without having to dig into your bank account. Just call 877-378-8669 and ask for more information about Vehicles of Change. Again, the number to call is 877-378-8669. If it has a VIN, we'll take it in. Thank you.
Welcome back. Dominic in Severn, Maryland. Hey, Dominic, what's up?
Yeah, yesterday you had a caller call and pose the question, how much does the waste heat from nuclear power plants affect global warming? And I've got an answer.
Okay.
The total amount of power that is used from all sources on the planet is 1/10,000th of what we use, of what is received from the sun. So if you just add the two numbers together and then calculate how much the temperature of the Earth has to increase to offset that in radiation, the answer is well less than 1/100th of 1 degree. Mm-hmm. And global warming right now has warmed us by about 1.8 degrees, so it's 200 times greater than the effect of all uses of power on the planet.
Right. Well, that's fascinating. Dominic, it's amazing. I've got the smartest listeners on the air. I really appreciate it. Thanks for that information. Art in White Plains, New York. Hey, Art, what's up?
How you doing, Tom? Just want to point out, I saw a movie this week. Thank you for your services, and I'm a Vietnam era veteran, and this opened my eyes to a lot of things with the treatment of the soldiers now, these days, how they're treated when they come back. I was fortunate. I was college educated when I went in as a draftee, and actually I saw things and I picked and choose what course I was going to take. However, these guys that are in there now are just very young and very impressionable by doing whatever they're told and this, that, and the other thing. And they come back all messed up, as I saw in this movie was depicted. And the treatment that they get at the VA was horrendous, as it was shown in this movie, that they have to wait months to get treatment for the PSD situation. I just said it's a terrific eye-opener, and people should, be, more aware of this stuff. As I feel
people would be, Art, if we had a draft.
Yeah, well,
I mean, that's the bottom line. You've got fewer than 1% of Americans are now engaged in the military, are now participating in the military. And it used to be 100% of households, or maybe 90% of households, or 95% of households. The top, 5% would, hire a doctor to say that their son had bone spurs. But the rest of America actually had the experience that you had during the Vietnam era of interacting with the military, perhaps involuntarily, but doing it. And that, I think, is a good thing. I'm not in favor of a pure military draft. I think that people who are objectors to military service should be able to serve their country for a year in another venue, volunteering in hospitals, volunteering as teachers, volunteering, to plant trees or fight wildfires or whatever it may be. But I think that there should be, after people graduate from high school, there should be a year of national service required, whether it's in the military or whether it's in a civilian environment. It should be supported. People should be paid for that service. And after that, they should get free college education or free trade school. That should be the transition from childhood to adulthood that is so necessary psychologically and culturally. And then we do that, as is done in many European countries, for example, as is done in Israel, as is done all over the world. I think that we should be doing that. All right, I got to move on, but thank you for the call. Well said. Jim in Los Angeles. Hey, Jim, what's up?
Thom Hartmann, Professor Hartmann, the smartest man in all media. So wonderful to talk to you. Two important points. One, please don't say Fox again without saying the Fox Nixon new GOPP TV, Grand Old Party Propaganda TV. You know that's where it started.
Yeah.
And the most important thing for all your listeners is go register to vote. Register Democratic. I loved your conversation with the independent, and the independents have cost us wars, the independents, and including probably your friend Ralph Nader.
I opposed Ralph's 2004 run.
I know,
and told him that to his face.
And how could he not be holding himself responsible? He doesn't. He's an intelligent guy. He's done some wonderful things. So we're not busting him, but we need everyone, and everyone out there, all your listeners and viewers, have to register their grandmothers, their aunts, uncles to register Democratic and have overwhelming. We need to overwhelm the polls, to get by the voter suppression and the computers counting the votes. And I have another solution I'll let you in on later, but man, I love you, Tom. You're the best, and you help hold the progressive and intelligent. And
well, thank you, Jim. This isn't a Trump cabinet meeting. I don't need the praise, but I appreciate your kind words. I think, though, that your message that the DNC has to hold itself together and that we Democrats and we progressives have to pull ourselves together and frankly, in my opinion, have to take over the Democratic Party and run it in a responsible fashion and restore America, restore the American vision, which was shared by most Americans, of LBJ's Great Society and Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal. Those should be our poll stars. Jim, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's Anything Goes weekend here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Back with more of your calls right after this. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Naomi Klein's brilliant new book, This Changes Everything. This from the introduction. A voice came over the intercom. Would the passengers of Flight 3935, scheduled to depart Washington, D.C. for Charleston, South Carolina, kindly collect their carry-on luggage and get off the plane? They went down the stairs and gathered on the hot tarmac. Then they saw something unusual. The wheels of the U.S. Airways jet had sunk into the black pavement as if it was wet cement. The wheels were lodged so deep, in fact, that the truck that came to tow the plane away couldn't pry out loose. The airline had hoped that without the added weight of the plane's 35 passengers, the aircraft would be light enough to pull. It wasn't. Someone posted a picture. Why is my flight canceled?
because D.C. is so damn hot that our planes sank 4 inches into the pavement. Eventually, a larger, more powerful vehicle was brought in to tow the plane, and this time it worked. The plane finally took off 3 hours behind schedule. The spokesperson for the airline blamed the incident on very unusual temperatures. The temperatures in the summer of 2012 were indeed unusually hot, as they were the year before and the year before. And it's no mystery why this has been happening. The profligate burning of fossil fuels, the very thing that U.S. Airways was bound and determined to do, despite the inconvenience presented by a melting tarmac. This irony, the fact that the burning of fossil fuels is so radically changing our climate that it's getting in the way of our capacity to burn fossil fuels, did not stop the passengers of Flight 3935 from re-embarking and continuing their journeys. Nor was climate change mentioned in any of the major news coverage of the incident. I'm in no position to judge these passengers. All of us who live high consumer lifestyles, wherever we may happen to reside, are metaphorically passengers on Flight 3935. Faced with a crisis that threatens our survival as a species, our entire culture is continuing to do the very thing that caused the crisis, only with an extra dose of elbow grease behind it. Like the airline bringing in a truck with a more powerful engine to tow that plane, the global economy is upping the ante from conventional sources of fossil fuels to even dirtier and more dangerous versions. Bitumen from the Alberta tar sands, oil from deepwater drilling, gas from hydraulic fracking, coal from detonated mountains, and so on. Meanwhile, each supercharged natural disaster produces new irony-laden snapshots of a climate increasingly inhospitable to the very industries most responsible for its warming, like the 2013 historic floods in Calgary that forced the head offices of the oil companies mining the Alberta tar sands to go dark and send their employees home, while a train carrying flammable petroleum products teetered on the edge of a disintegrating rail bridge. Or the drought that hit the Mississippi River 1 year earlier, pushing water levels so low that barges loaded with coal and oil were unable to move for days while they waited for the Army Corps of Engineers to dredge a channel. They had to appropriate funds allocated to rebuild from the previous year's historic flooding along the same waterway. Or the coal-fired power plants in other parts of the country that were temporarily shut down because the waterways that they draw into cooler machinery were either too hot or too dry, or in some cases, both. Living with this kind of cognitive dissonance is simply part of being alive in this jarring moment of history, when a crisis we have been studiously ignoring is hitting us in the face. And yet we're doubling down on the stuff that caused the crisis in the first place. I denied climate change for longer than I care to admit. I knew it was happening, sure, and not like Donald Trump and the Tea Party years going on about how the continued existence of winter proves it's all a hoax. But I stayed pretty hazy on the details and only skimmed most of the news stories, especially the really scary ones. I told myself the science was too complicated and that the environmentalists, they're dealing with it. And I continue to behave as if there was nothing wrong with the shiny card in my wallet attesting to my elite frequent flyer status. A great many of us engage in this kind of climate change denial. We look for a split second and then we look away. Or we look but then turn it into a joke. More signs of the apocalypse, which is another way of looking away. Or we look but tell ourselves comforting stories about how humans are clever and will come up with a technological miracle that will safely suck the carbon out of the skies or magically turn down the heat of the sun, which I was to discover while researching this book is yet another way of looking away. Or we try to look, we look but try to be hyper-rational about it. Dollar for dollar, it's more efficient to focus on economic development than climate change, since wealth is the best protection from climate extremes, weather extremes. As if having a few more dollars will make much difference when your city is underwater, which is a way of looking away if you happen to be a policy wonk. Or we look but tell ourselves we're too busy to care about something so distant and abstract, even though we saw the water in the subways in New York City and the people on the rooftops in New Orleans and know that no one is safe, the most vulnerable least of all. And though perfectly understandable, this too is a way of looking away. Or we look but tell ourselves that all we can do is focus on ourselves, meditate and shop at farmers markets and stop driving, but forget trying to actually change the systems that are making the crisis inevitable, because that's too much bad energy and it'll never work. And at first it may appear as if we are looking, because many of these lifestyle changes are indeed part of the solution, but we still have one eye tightly shut. Or maybe we really look, but then inevitably we seem to forget. Remember and then forget again. Climate change is like that. It's hard to keep in your head for very long. We engage in this odd form of on again, off again ecological amnesia for perfectly rational reasons. We deny it because we fear that letting in the full reality of this crisis will change everything. and we are right. And the book is This Changes Everything by Naomi Klein. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Marty in Evergreen Park, Illinois. Hey, Marty, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Love your program. Happy Friday. I just wanted to chime in and vent some frustrations with Trump and his inability to keep his thoughts out of federal court, like federal charges and court cases that are pending. I think him chiming in on that Bo Bergdahl situation is really not his place to do so. It's none of his business. He should leave the courts to do what the courts, do and let the.
Well, here's the problem, Marty. What Donald Trump is, he's making a trade-off, right? He is trading his political capital with the fringe elements of his base, the people who just want a tough guy Mussolini type, take names, kick ass, stern father running our country. He's gratifying them. He's saying something that makes them happy, but at the expense of causing everybody to have questions about the quality of justice that is served up by our court system and now in the military. And that shouldn't be. The President of the United States should not be questioning the quality of the criminal justice system.
Yeah, he should not be interfering with the process by which, somebody's guilt or innocence is determined, and he's like talking about the death penalty for this guy in, New York before we've even had a trial for him. Right. And I just think that's a very dangerous precedent.
Yeah, it is. And it's also destructive to the United States as a whole, which is why presidents prior to him never did something, to the best of my knowledge, never did anything like this. Marty, thank you for the call. Steve in Fountain Valley, California. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, love the show and read several of your books.
Thank you.
Hey, I was listening to a conversation yesterday, I believe, with a lady from San Pedro. I'm retired, but I'm 37 years union member, and I have an example I wanted to tell you if I can articulate really quick of people who vote for Trump against their own best interests.
Okay.
So, union member, 37 years, trying to convince people that this is not good. An example, okay, we have a railroad retirement board, and our retirement is not funded by the federal government. However, it is administered by the government. So I'm sure there's a small amount of expense, but we are self-funded. However, there's a railroad retirement board, one labor member, one neutral, usually has some legal background, and then one from management. For 8 years of Obama administration, they refused to fill this railroad retirement board. We have one member missing. So they also refuse to fund the staff of the office. So therefore, our claims are slower. It takes longer to get things processed. So people don't understand when I argue with them about it, Second Amendment, the whole deal. You tell them Obama or any Democrat can't take your guns away, they don't hear it.
Yeah, hang on just a second. You've moved on to that. But what you were talking about just a minute ago about the Republicans defunding the railroad, the board that administers the railroad pensions.
Right.
That's exactly what they're doing to Social Security. They've been cutting a couple % out of the Social Security budget every year for a long, long time. And the result now is that it's getting harder and harder for people to get a quick response from the Social Security Administration because their staff has been cut. And, again, this is Republicans trying to turn the service from Social Security, which was always good, it was always excellent, into crappy service so that people will start getting dissatisfied with Social Security. So when a Republican president comes along and says, we should just turn the Social Security thing over to Wells Fargo and Bank of America,
then
Yeah.
people will say, oh, yeah, that's a good idea. I really hate the service I'm getting.
Yeah, and I tell these people and their families, wives, like, you know, you're voting against your own self-interest. This is our pension. We've paid into it our entire lives. It's not a drain on the taxpayers. We're funding this, and they're just going to kill it. You have them in charge of all three houses, or both houses in the presidency. So anyway, thanks for all your help, Tom, and I'm going to read that book. Sounds like I need it for my friends on Facebook here.
Okay. Good luck, Steve. Thanks a lot for the call. Larry in Elma, Washington. Hey, Larry, what's on your mind? Oh, Larry. Let's try Josh in Cantonment, Florida. Hey, Josh, what's up?
Hey, Mr. Hartman. I had a bone to pick with you because yesterday you were talking about I want to talk about the DNC cheating, and yesterday you were saying that, quote, we should learn from it. And I was wondering if you could elaborate that. I was going to say a couple things, and you could retort. The Democratic Party should have already learned from it because betraying the socialists has already happened before. It happened to Henry Wallace. In the primary, he won the primary, and then they had a quote-unquote recount, and then suddenly the racist Harry Truman won it.
Right.
Donna Brazile cheated. She gave questions away. Hillary Clinton is one of the reasons Trump won, because if you look it up in the Podesta emails, she told the corporate news to give Trump free airtime as a Pied Piper candidate, and they did. And regardless of whether the media was negative or not, he got more influence.
Yeah, Josh, I'm not willing to blame Hillary Clinton for Donald Trump getting free media. This was the media industry enthusiastically promoting a reality TV star. He was already a TV star, and they knew that putting a TV star on TV would produce revenues for them. I get that. But, specifically, what is it that you wanted to argue, debate, or discuss about the DNC's cheating?
That Bernie Sanders had better approval ratings for weeks, and the DNC cannot say they didn't know what they were doing, how much of a risk they were taking.
Right. I agree with you on all that, Josh. I think it was outrageous. It was insane. It apparently wasn't illegal, but it should be. And now this is all assuming, by the way, that Donna Brazile's. We have one side of the story here. This is assuming that Donna Brazile's testimony, that her book, this is an excerpt from her new book, actually, that was published in Politico yesterday, that it's all 100% accurate. I don't know that that's the case, although I'm willing to believe it. But I don't see where sitting around and complaining about the DNC does anything other than help the Republican Party. I am, as Mark Pocan said at the beginning of this program, I'm outraged by what happened. We need to absolutely make sure it never happens again. The DNC needs to clean up their act. They need to deal with the superdelegate issue. I want to know why James Zogby just got removed, for example, by Tom Perez. There's some serious issues with the Democratic Party, but I'm saying that as a Democrat who wants the Democratic Party to start winning elections again. We've lost 1,000 elected seats in the last 10 years. I want to see the Democratic Party start winning again. And what we know, we absolutely know, Franklin Roosevelt was elected 4 times president, reelected 3 times. Lyndon Johnson, Lyndon Johnson decided to bail out, but that was the Vietnam War. We know the Democrats win elections when they run on New Deal, Great Society issues. That's all Bernie was doing. There was no secret sauce there. There was no magic Bernie Sanders. He was straightforward, and he would be the first to tell you this. Straightforward, FDR, LBJ, New Deal, Great Society. This is the core of the Democratic Party. And it needs to return to that core, and it needs to do so rapidly and aggressively, in my opinion.
You can't tell me that voting for Coke because Pepsi might win isn't old school BS.
I'm not saying to vote for Coke because Pepsi might win. I'm saying get inside Coke and take it over. There's a whole world of difference here, Josh. You can't compare this with companies. Companies cannot be taken over by their customers. Political parties are intended to be taken over by their customers.
That's not true. If it were true, then Bernie Sanders would have won.
I'm sorry, Josh. Your logic is There's no logic to that. The Democratic Party is being taken over. Once again, by the way, it's being taken back. I mean, the Democratic Party was in the 1990s, in the very early 1990s, late 80s, the Democratic Party was largely taken over by the Democratic Leadership Council, by the DLC, and basically a bunch of corporatist Dems who said, hey, the Republicans have destroyed the money that we're getting from the labor unions, and they're cutting into the money we're getting from the trial lawyers, and so we're going to start going to the banks. And maybe the food companies and the agriculture companies and whatnot. These clean industries to get our money. Let the Republicans go to the oil company. It was a mistake. Well, maybe it wasn't even a mistake. I mean, it got Bill Clinton the presidency. But it's no longer appropriate in this era and this time. And this is why the Democratic Party, in my opinion, should be saying enough. We're not going. And this is why I thought it was a big mistake when the Democratic Party recently change the rules that President Barack Obama put in place, that the DNC cannot take money from lobbyists. Now they can. And, for 8 years, the DNC couldn't take money from lobbyists. There are some serious issues, Josh, that need to be resolved. But they're not going to be resolved by calling into a talk show and complaining about the Democratic Party. They're going to be resolved by showing up at your local Democratic Party and becoming a precinct committee person and participating with the party, getting inside it, making those changes. It's so easy and so cheap to make a phone call and complain about something on the air. And it actually can do damage. It does damage to the Democratic Party, to the future of this country, frankly, which I think the Democratic Party holds, to simply write it off. We need to take it over.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
So quit complaining and get off your ass and do something. We'll be back. And welcome back. Nate was telling me that on our YouTube channel, there's a bunch of chatters there, and that somebody said, oh, look, Thom is broadcasting from a library. And then somebody else said, no, that's a green screen. Well, I wanted to let you know it is not a green screen. These are actual books. And all the books on this shelf and this shelf and this shelf, I wrote. And that's the collected writings of Thomas Jefferson, published in 1903, as I recall. This is the collected decisions of the U.S. Supreme Court in the 1887 court year. So that's got the Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad. That's the name of the case. Is in there. These are other older books. Some going back to the 1700s. Those are all books I wrote down there. These are all books I wrote down here, mostly foreign translations. This is the remainder of the collected writings of Jefferson. We got Longfellow's poems there. That shelf up at the top are all books that I wrote. These, I don't know, can you see you can't see the trophies up there. Okay, those awards that you could see in the shot before, those are 3 Telly Awards and a New York Festival award, World Media Festival Award that we got for doing the Big Picture Show. And so it's an award-winning television program now, it was. I no longer do the show. So anyhow, that's what's going on here to answer your questions. That said, let's pick up some phone calls. Lynn in Sikeston, Missouri. Am I saying that right, Lynn?
Yeah, Sikeston, Missouri.
Lynn?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I'm not hearing Lynn. Are you hearing Lynn?
Hello? Yeah,
You're hearing Lynn? What did I do? Oh. Lynn, I'm sorry. I unplugged my headphone. There we go.
I can hear you.
Okay.
I hear you.
Go for it, Lynn. I'm sorry. I had unplugged my headphone when I turned around to point at the bookcase. It just popped right out. So, so anyhow, I'm back.
Delayed here. I was wanting to draw a little attention to the governor of Wisconsin and Indiana and Missouri putting a commercial on the program down here on our local program saying that they want to thank Browner. I guess it's the lieutenant governor of Illinois.
He's the governor. Bruce Browner is the governor.
Yeah. I think the lieutenant governor is the one that was against him, and he vetoed what the stuff he wanted to do. And they're saying that he raised the taxes because to raise the taxes, and that all these people in Illinois are going to Missouri and Indiana and Wisconsin to get a good job. All three governors coming on.
Right. Well, we'll see if it works. I mean, you know, Texas tried that.
Yeah,
Texas was.
That's what I'm waiting on.
Yeah, remember when Texas? This was like 4 or 5 years ago. Texas was running ads in California that featured Rick Perry saying, "Come to Texas. You know, we got low taxes and we're growing jobs like crazy." And the people in California just laughed. I mean, they just thought it was the silliest thing.
That's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just went to a right-to-work state. Missouri did, you know, right-to-work, right not to get paid state.
Right to work for less.
Yeah, and I said, yeah, I'll come on to Missouri and get you a good job.
Yeah. Well, and the reality is that people who live in right-to-work-for-less states, on average, earn $5,000 a year less money than people who live in union-allowed and union-protected states. So it's pretty straightforward stuff. Lynn, thanks for the call. That's a fascinating story. You know, it's like there's billions of dollars floating around. Our companies and our billionaires are awash in cash. So, of course, they're going to spend a lot of it on television advertising. We'll be right back. With you. I'm looking for my one sheet. I don't have it. We'll do that next week. Maine in Chicago. Hey, Maine, thanks for the call. What's up?
Hey, how you doing, Tom? Yeah, I was just, wanting to see candidates come into the Democratic Party that will say, no longer trickle down, but will rise from the bottom and the middle, and we'll have single-payer health care, and that we'll also have, and we'll get rid of the Electoral College, and run for gun insurance. I mean, we have specific issues that they run on and stick and stand on them. And if they do this with sincerity, like the Tea Party pushed the Republican Party. You know, I know you talk about not having a third party or something, but having some kind of arm of the people or the People's Party, that will push these Democrats to say these things, to say we'll no longer do trickle down, we'll rise from the bottom and out of the middle, and we'll have single payer health care, and they're running for gun insurance and do it like that.
Yeah, all excellent points, Maine. And what's so bizarre to me is the narrative that we find in our corporate media right now, that the fringes are taking over the Democratic and Republican parties. I would agree with that with regard to the Republican Party. It has been taken over by a group of a few hundred billionaires and a few hundred corporations, and probably more like 50 or 60 corporations. And a couple hundred billionaires and multimillionaires. But the Democratic Party is slowly but moving in the direction of going back to its own roots of being the party of the people, the party of Lyndon Johnson, the party of Franklin Roosevelt. And all they need to do is promote that. And that is not the fringe. That is the middle. The vast majority of Americans want Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. The vast majority of Americans want a clean environment, a clean air, clean water. The vast majority of Americans want the USDA and the FDA to have actual scientists, not right-wing talk show hosts, running their science programs. I mean, we can go through this long, long list. The vast majority of Americans would like free college education. They would like decent education, K through 12. I mean, it just goes on and on. That's the friggin' middle. And to say that the left, I mean, I remember this meme from 10, 15 years ago when I started this show, 14 years ago, and there was somebody go, oh, this is the leftists have taken, the Air America, these are the far left. So I got a far leftist on. I got on the guy who's running the Communist Party of the United States of America, CPUSA. And I was like, how you doing? And he's like, great, we're growing like a weed. And I was like, really, seriously? Yeah, we're up to 532 members. Or something like that. I mean, it was embarrassing. There is a far left. It is not represented in the Democratic Party, which is just fine with me. Yeah, but there's a far right too, which is misogynistic and racist and xenophobic and hateful, and they have taken over the Republican Party. So yeah, I'm with you. I got to move along, but thank you. Very, very well said. Bob in Frederick, Maryland. Hey, Bob, you're on the air. Bob, you need to turn down your radio.
Just fine with me.
And okay, Bob's listening to his radio. Kittle in Boca Raton, Florida. Hey, Kittle, what's on your mind?
Kitty.
Kitty, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, it is an eye. I'm sorry. Time to go to the eye doctor here.
I actually called about Citizens United, but before that, I wanted to say that, you know, with the Democratic Party going in a new direction, I think that we need to champion some new causes instead of the same old that goes every single election. And I honestly think that we could champion net neutrality. I think it's a big issue.
Yes.
And I would love to see some of our people go out there and say, this is our cause. We're really pushing for this. It could be our coal miners message. You know, Donald Trump took coal miners, made that a big thing, and I think we could do that with net neutrality.
I agree, Kitty. The problem is that MSNBC will not allow a discussion of this on their air.
But we're talking about it on your channel.
Yeah, but I mean, but when you talk Democratic politics, most of that ends up, and most of those politicians end up making their case on MSNBC. And you know, they're owned by Comcast, and Comcast is going to be one of the biggest beneficiaries of the destruction of net neutrality. They're aggressively working on this to destroy net neutrality. They've initiated several lawsuits against the federal government. You know, I mean, it may be that they can discuss it on MSNBC. It's just that I've never seen it. And it probably does pop up there from time to time. But to turn it into a campaign like you're talking about, I don't think that the electronic media will go along with it.
I know, but we do need it. So,
Yeah,
you know, maybe
I agree
people
with you.
listening can call up, you know, the congressmen and senators and push that issue. But I wanted to say something about Citizens United, because it seems to me with all this talk about Russia and having, like, you know, Americans dictating who our leaders are, you know, we don't want anybody else to have their thumb on the scale for our elections. And that's what all this Russia business is. But if you think about Citizens United says that corporations are equal to people. And so they get to put their money in the ring, in the political ring, and they get to influence elections with their dollars. And what I always had a problem with Citizens United, and I don't hear anybody really bring this point up, American corporations are not all owned by Americans. You have people from China owning American corporations, Russia, Saudi Arabia. And you're telling me that now we have foreigners, I know it's not government, but foreign nationals, that just because they have an American corporation, now they're almost quasi-citizens where they could take their money and put it behind a politician. I think that's so wrong.
And they're doing that. And they're doing that. These foreign corporations are, in many cases, very politically active in the United States. I agree with you, Kitty, and it's tremendously concerning. And it's brought us what we have right now, which is corporate rule, basically. Kitty, we're out of time, but thank you for the call. Thanks for listening to us on SiriusXM. Thank you all for being with us this week. It's been a great week. We will be back on Monday. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It does require all of us to show up. So get out there, show up, participate, have your voice heard. You know, don't just complain, get active. Tag, you're it. We'll see you on Monday. Have a great weekend.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter
with weekly updates of leading. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com.